Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1989 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Jessica Tandy won for her performance in Driving Miss Daisy. But why did she beat fellow nominees Isabelle Adjani, Pauline Collins, Jessica Lange, and Michelle Pfeiffer? We'll explore all this and more today on the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 62nd year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1989. We'll be discussing how Jessica Tandy won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is a guy that you hear pretty much every week on this show through his phenomenal questions. And he also previously joined me for another season finale, breaking down 1949. Here he is again, breaking down a lineup from 40 years later. One of the very best members of film Twitter, someone who I think is probably the best commentator on Best Actress through his Fritz and the Oscar videos. Welcome back, Fritz.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me. What an introduction. It's been so long, you can call me Daisy.
Oh, yes, it's true.
Thanks so much for having me again.
Back when we last talked, Jessica Tandy was just a budding actress in the 40s, and now here she is. So, very excited to have you back to break down another very fascinating race here. But before we talk 1989, let us talk Best Actress as a category. So last time I asked you to give me your favorite Best Actress win of all time, and you said, of course, Louise Reiner in The Good Earth.
Yeah, that was me.
Yes. So my alternate question for you here is, what would you rate as your favorite Best Actress lineup of all time?
Very difficult question for a Best Actress lover like me. So I started with 20, and I thought I cannot talk about 20 Best Actress races. I narrowed it down to 10. I thought it's still too much. Narrowed it down to 5, and then I realized too many are missing now. So I thought in the end, I just say 1. That's probably easier.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So I thought it has to be one where all 5 performances are great. I mean, you have stuff like 1978, which of course has great nominees, but then there's Ellen Burstyn and Same Time Next Year. And sorry, Ellen, but not this time, not this year and not next year. You have 1950, which was of course great, but I'm not the biggest fan of Anne Baxter. 1974 was very close, but then in the end, I decided to go with 1962.
Oh,
which
I
has,
love that.
Yeah, for me, it's Catherine Hepburn's greatest performance. I know people are a little bit divided there. Anne Bancroft is one of my favorite Best Actress winners. Bette Davis, deservedly legendary. Geraldine Page, totally unhinged in Sweet Bird of Youth, and of course Lee Remick, heartbreaking in Days of Wine and Roses. And while I'm very happy that Anne Bancroft won, every one of them would have been a great winner.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was one where when I was figuring out my own ranking for that lineup, I was like heartbroken to put like Lee Remick in 5th.
Yes,
because I'm like,
yes,
she would be
too.
my winner in any other year. She would be the winner in like the very next year, 1963, for example.
Yeah.
So that's just one where I wish like any one of those could have come out the next year and maybe won, because yeah, that's one where I think like every single one of them is deserving of an Oscar. So great pick. Well, my other question for you, you said on that first episode that your most heartbreaking loss in this category were 2. One was the joint losses of Ingrid Bergman, Joe Clayburgh, and Geraldine Page to Jane Fonda in 1978, as you previously mentioned, and one that's near and dear to my heart, of course, which is Glenn Close's loss in 2018. So now I'll ask, what would you say is your most heartbreaking overall Oscar snub in this category?
Well, to quote your other German guest, Christoph, again, and I think I said it the last time, so my heart does not really break anymore about the Oscars. So it's more like cynical and hard to say. Of course, I mean, there are so many foreign language performances where you think, would they ever have been nominated? Is this really a snub? Horror performances, comedic performances. I could say Liv Ullmann in Autumn Sonata, who I personally think is even better than Ingrid Bergman. I could say Katharine Hepburn in Bringing Up Baby. In the end, I decided to be a little bit controversial, because why not, and pick a performance that I know not everybody loves. But I would say, according to every Oscar rule, this should have been an Oscar nominee, but instead it was a headline creating snub, and this is Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady.
Ooh, wow.
I know not a lot of people don't like her. I love her. Would be my winner that year. I know she's dubbed, but honestly, Marion Cotillard is dubbed. Deborah Kahn, The King and I, was dubbed. Peggy Wood was dubbed the next year in The Sound of Music, and seriously, all she does is sing one song. In the case of Audrey Hepburn, she at least has more to do than just the dubbing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know people are divided how convincing she is as this flower girl, but I love her. And yeah, why not? It's not heartbreaking. My heart doesn't break over Audrey Hepburn not being nominated for My Fair Lady, and I'm pretty sure she was fine with it too.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, why not her?
Why not her?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's always tough when you have someone who has also just already won Best Actress and has other nominations to say like, oh, my heart is broken that she didn't get another nomination that she probably wouldn't have won for anyway. But yeah, I don't feel quite as passionately about that performance as others do in either direction. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm just like, she does a decent job in it and is definitely more convincing in the latter half of the film, but that's a really good pick, and I think that would have been a really interesting wrench into that race, perhaps. I don't know how much that would have complicated things. But anyway, let's talk about this year at the Oscars, the 62nd Academy Awards, where the nominees were Isabelle Adjani in Camille Claudel, Pauline Collins in Shirley Valentine, Jessica Lange in Music Box, Michelle Pfeiffer in The Fabulous Baker Boys, and Jessica Tandy in Driving Miss Daisy, with the winner being Jessica Tandy. So before we break down these performances, Fritz, would love to know your overall thoughts on this final lineup of the 80s that we have here.
So it's definitely better than the last lineup we talked about, which had this
hard not to be better.
Which had this all-time great performances and 4 nominees. I'm sure not even the two of us remember anymore. I would say there are great performances in here. There are interesting angles. You have this Broadway veteran, you have this other actress recreating her stage success, you have this new star versus Hollywood legend. No, maybe not Hollywood legend, but at least some acting legend. No Meryl Streep, which of course makes this already quite a unique lineup. I would say for me, it lacks a little bit of a passion pick. So it's not a lineup where I would say I'm passionate about, even though there's great work here. Most of the time, I think while watching these movies, I turned into this Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's pointing at the TV and I was thinking, Joanna Lumley, Patti LuPone, Jennifer Tilly.
So many great underrated actresses. I know.
Yeah. I'd totally forgotten that Jennifer Tilly was in The Fabulous Baker Boys.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen any of those movies in ages, so it was nice to rewatch them.
Yeah, this is a lineup that I was actually mostly unfamiliar with. I had seen Driving Miss Daisy and The Fabulous Baker Boys before this, but the other three I had very little knowledge of. I had not seen before, other than what, friends of ours have said about some of them. So I went in actually pretty fresh for most of this lineup. I think on the whole, it's kind of an odd group because when I look at the 80s, I see a lot of like rubber stamping and huge Hollywood names. And yes, we obviously have like Jessica Lange here getting yet another nomination in the 80s. And Michelle Pfeiffer was popular in this decade, but like Pauline Collins, Isabelle Adjani, even like Jessica Tandy to a certain extent are not the kinds of big Best Actress contenders that dominated this category in this decade. And obviously Jessica Tandy is a little bit different because her film was such a sensation and she was a veteran, but it's an interesting change of pace, I think, from what we've had, at least over the past few years in this category. Not a huge fan overall of the lineup. There are certainly some high highs among them, I would say, but the others are maybe a little more forgettable. We'll see when we talk about it. But on the bright side, as you said, I do think it is certainly better than what you and I talked about last time, that 49 lineup. So nowhere to go but up.
Yeah, there's no pinky.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, shall we jump right into it?
Happy to.
Well, we're starting off with by far the longest film in this lineup, Isabelle Adjani in Camille Claudel. So Isabelle Adjani, we last talked about on the 1975 episode, where I happened to give her the win for The Story of Adele H, her big breakthrough performance when she was only 19, and she got some great offers from Hollywood and otherwise after that. She was in Roman Polanski's The Tenant the very next year. She was in The Driver. She had a huge 1981 where she was in Quartet and Possession, winning the Cannes Best Actress Award for Possession, and she's winning multiple César Awards. She's very active in the 80s. She did Ishtar from Elaine May with Warren Beatty, and then she takes a big interest in adapting the life of Camille Claudel to the screen. So Camille Claudel was a real-life French sculptor who was active in the late 19th century into the 20th. Not entirely well known, but she had an affair with Auguste Rodin, who is considered the founder of modern sculpture. So Isabelle ended up getting rights to Claudel's sculpture work, and she immersed herself in the world of sculpture, and she hired on Bruno Nueten to be the director, with many not knowing at the time that they were formerly lovers, and they shared a 10-year-old son, so that's interesting. But yeah, she was very instrumental in getting this film off the ground. So in the film, Isabelle plays the title character of Camille Claudel, tracking her journey from this young prodigy to her being taken on as a sort of disciple of Auguste Rodin, played by Gerard Depardieu, which leads to them having a romantic affair, even though he has a wife, which obviously complicates things. And it's largely about how her relationship with Rodin starts to consume her, while also sort of charting her journey to getting her art out there in the world. So let's talk Isabelle Adjani in general and this film. Fritz, also worth noting, she's the first French actor to get multiple Oscar nominations for French language performances. So thoughts on this one?
I mean, I have to be honest that I probably know less about Isabelle Adjani than I should know. So of course I've seen Adele H, I've seen her in Possession and Queen Margot, but probably not nearly enough of her filmography to have really a very deep opinion about her. I would say that she reminds me of many other, I would say European actresses specifically, like Liv Ullmann or Isabelle Huppert, where I feel that they have no boundaries in their acting, which maybe sounds kind of weird, but with a lot of great actresses, even like Katharine Hepburn or Betty Davis, I constantly sense that they are in control of their characters, and not in a Meryl Streep seeing the wheels turning in her head kind of way, but just in control. And with Isabelle Adjani or these other actresses, you sense they completely let go of themselves and do whatever is necessary to bring this character across without ever making it feel artificial or out of place. And she is a very strong screen presence. And having seen Adele H, where she already goes crazy, you sense that this is kind of a great fit for her, the character. And I mean, it's kind of funny that this is the French movie in this lineup, but this, I would say, is probably the biggest Oscar bait character. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking if this came out today and let's say Jessica Chastain played this, film Twitter would be like, oh, she's playing a real life artist who goes crazy. Somebody wants another Oscar.
True.
And I would say I like the movie better than I remembered. It has great score and production values. It looks pretty good. It feels important without self-importance. And is a very good star vehicle. I would say the first half I was kind of skeptical, but I'm pretty sure we talk about that. In the second half, Isabelle Adjani really takes off.
Yeah, I completely agree. First of all, love that Isabelle was so active in getting this off the ground, because it's obviously a fascinating story to be told. I think it's more natural to want to tell the story of Rodin and his influence on modern sculpture and all that, but to have this woman in the shadows who's now much more celebrated after her death, I think that is a compelling story to tell. And I think Isabelle Adjani brings such an investment in it. You can see how she cares about every aspect of Camille, even her flaws, her stubbornness, her pride, and she's not interested, I don't think, in glamorizing her so much as like making us understand that this very troubled artist had these good times, she had these peaks, but also some darkness and some especially bad times. And what I find fascinating with the performance is that, like, sort of a little bit like you're maybe saying there, for the first 2 hours, I would say, of this nearly 3 hour movie, it's pretty subtle work compared to what you might be expecting from a biopic about like the life of a stormy artist type, but it just lays the groundwork for this incredibly explosive third hour. And she is just so locked in with just so much ferocity, and it goes to some very raw and I would say even shocking places with how vulnerable she is, very warts and all, but you cannot take your eyes off her. She just has this great magnetic pull where even when she's just like reacting to someone else or when she's sculpting or whatever, the eyes are always telling a story and showing the journey of this woman. Because, like, generally with artists, they feel very strongly, right? Especially when it comes to finding like value in their art. And I do think that very much comes through, like that unwavering passion, you know?
Yeah, totally. What I like so much about her, I'm not 100% sure how old she was when she did this, but there's always something a little bit childlike about her. I don't know if this makes sense. So her face just reads very young, and she has these kind of eyes that feel very innocent and skeptical and unsure about what to do. And I like how in her performance she always feels kind of very self-assured when she's working, but whenever Rodin is around her, there's this shyness and skepticism about what she does. And what helps is that she has this stunning screen presence and is a very natural actress. And this gives her character a lot of dimension.
Yeah.
I mean, already her introduction, she has this kind of star entrance where everybody is looking for her, and she is somewhere in Paris in this hole and digging for clay, I think it was.
Yep.
And it takes a long time until we see her face, but of course we already know who she is, so we know that she is the main character. But there's something about her that immediately captures your attention, even just by her body language.
Yeah, I love that. I think you can see just from there that how much she cares about her work above all else. Like, even when she's like going to that school with all the different clays available to her, she has this very kid in a candy store energy with like feeling all the different kinds and just touching them and smelling them. It's this very intimate experience that does just sell how art for her is like this very primal thing that's like almost an extension of her personality, of like her being, you know? And we also see how she has a bit of a temper. And like after she sees him like getting a little too handsy with one of the models, and she tries to like ward off one of the men at the studio, she's storming off. But then as we see in the very next scene, it's because she thinks that Rodin doesn't like her sculptures and he ignores her, and she just is desperately seeking his approval. And as we know, Isabelle is very good at portraying that obsession, that single-minded sort of drive. It's very much in her wheelhouse, and I don't know how people in like 1989 who are very familiar with Isabelle's work up to that point felt about her playing like yet another kind of character like this. If it felt rote by this point, I don't know, but for me it is convincing, at least.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, she won us. I think she won a César for the performance, and have a feeling the French critics, if they were sick of her, they would probably let her know. I doubt that they're very subtle.
Yeah, I mean, she actually has an interview from around this time period where she said, passion is very destructive. It doesn't need to be that violent and crazy and wild. Having experienced it, you don't belong to yourself anymore. You belong to the passion. It's something you have to go through to learn what passion is about.
Yeah.
So that's how she kind of justifies the character, and just being so led by her passion that it just totally consumes her more than reason after a certain point, as we see in the final act of the film. And we also are seeing how happy she is and sort of demure when she's in his presence at the start. And he's complimenting her for like being an inspiration for one of his sculptures. And the moment she realizes that he said, you know, inspiration doesn't exist, and now he was kind of saying like he's inspired by her, she just has this really charged expression on her face of being proud of herself, being kind of aroused almost, and feeling like, yes, this is what I wanted from all this, from my relationship with this guy. I got him, you know. I think she portrays that really subtly. And again, it's not entirely showy work for a lot of the beginning here, but again, really is laying the groundwork nicely for what would ultimately consume her.
Yeah, definitely. I also like those scenes when they are, I think, at their parents' house somewhere in the country, and Rodin visits, and she is so visibly disturbed by his presence because he brings his not wife but live-in companion or whatever we want to call her, and she seems so unsure of herself. And then of course there is her disapproving mother, and she doesn't know how to handle her. And I like how much of her performance is also just a kind of rebellious woman, so that you get the feeling that art is important to her, but for her it is also a way to fight against society, to fight against expectations. So there's this very clear male-dominated society that she is fighting against. So with these sculptures, I think it's rather unusual for a woman to be so dominant there. And of course, there's her mother, who is just a complete nightmare, to say it like this.
Very religious.
And
yeah.
Yeah. And I like it very much in the scene again when Rodin is visiting her and her parents, how he then at some point says, "I want Camille with me at Paris," and suddenly her whole demeanor changes, and from one second to the next you see this her lighten up, and suddenly yes, this is what she wanted.
Yeah, really, really nice touch there. And yeah, they go about this affair, and it's interesting because I noticed just in watching how I feel like my attention started to wander a little bit as far as her character and her relationship with him. Like even her performance, because so little of it feels like it's really in her perspective by this part of the film. It feels like we're just kind of observing, like sort of clinically just watching this all happen. But then I love when her father is telling her that like she is starting to lose her individuality by being with this guy, and it kind of clicked into place with just how far she's invested herself into Rodin, working on sculptures for him rather than herself, that I feel like, you know, even I was starting to lose my own grip of her as an individual character. I don't know if that was fully intentional on the director's part or anything, but that is how I personally felt watching it. After a while, I was just like, okay, they're kind of going on this affair and it's fine, but I just feel like I'm not connecting with this character at this point. And I just found it very interesting to see the film through her father kind of acknowledge that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for a star vehicle that she basically built for herself, it is not. She doesn't come across as self-centered or selfish in her
Right.
performance or in how the movie is made. So it gives a lot of room to other characters. And
Yeah.
yet, I also have to admit, the first, probably 2 hours of the movie, I also sometimes my mind began to wander, and I wasn't always paying 100% attention. I had to go back again because you also have to read the subtitles.
Right.
Because my French is not that great that I could understand it. So there were a lot of cases where I went back again, but somehow I have a feeling when you finish the third hour, so when you finish the complete movie, a lot of the things she does at the beginning begin to make much more sense.
Right. Exactly. And before you know it, she's pregnant, which she reflects, I think, in her facial reaction that she's uncomfortable with it. I think maybe because it sort of is interfering with her art, but she's also still in love. So it's this very complicated mix of emotion that is asked of her. And, you know, she's asking him to marry her. She hopes that he won't be unfaithful whenever he's away. And that leads to, you know, this other woman confronting her in this jealous rage, of course, which gives us this great scene, I think, after of Camille very directly telling Rodin to choose between them, which she plays very subtly, but also really, really well. She's so calm and understated as she's making these declarations that, like, either choose me or I'm gone, you know? And she's somehow able to kind of mesmerize you, I think, even when she's barely even speaking above a whisper, you know? And she's obviously like justified in confronting him in that way because he's kind of trying to have it both ways and not bear the responsibility of having these two women in his life. But I love the scene after that too, where she's like scratching at that clay bust of him. Just like the intensity of her rage there is just, it's really just off to the races from there with her performance of how much she is feeling completely overwhelmed by her fury and her passion and all the different emotions she's feeling towards this man.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking, if this was an American movie at the time, I could see Jessica Lange in this, simply
Yeah.
because she also has this she can be very quiet while giving you the feeling that she will attack you at any second. And of course, Jessica Lange is also not afraid to go very big.
Right. Certainly true.
And
No, I could see that. I really could. Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes wish the script had given a little bit more room to the development of the relationship between Rodin and Camille. I had a feeling that while watching the movie, this shift from I love him to I'm completely crazy and hate him was very sudden.
Yeah.
But yeah, to Isabelle's credit, she did it still very well. And I mean, just things like where she's outside of his house and screams at the top of her lungs. This could be so over the top, but this is again where this, I don't know, this natural presence and this tigress comes alive, where you have she can, I have a feeling she can't be over the top. Whatever she does, it always feels true to the character. And it never feels like, I don't know. I don't want to be dismissive of Susan Hayward, but we know Susan Hayward could sometimes she could sometimes go a little bit overboard if she wanted to.
You could
where
say
you had
that.
where you had the feeling she did it to be big, and with Isabelle Adjani, this never comes across. It always feels that these big scenes at the end, they are just the natural evolution of her character and just what her character is now supposed to be doing. So she doesn't go big to show off. She goes big because her character demands her to go big.
Yeah. And because her character feels justified in doing so to get his attention. Obviously, that scene where she explodes at him, where he is like taking offense to the sculpture she made of him that he feels is demeaning. That's a really, really excellent scene. And he ends up kind of taking credit for her work, taking credit for her success. And she just erupts with this anger, which is everything she's felt against this bastard for so long, and she just blasts him for being so indecisive and going wherever is most convenient for him. I love when she screams, "You took everything, my youth, my work, everything." It's just like very visceral, and it's followed up by this very painful conversation where she reveals to him that she was pregnant once and he didn't even know it, and she had an abortion. It's just like all of the emotions under the sun encapsulated in this one confrontation scene that I agree, like it is like, it feels like it over the top on paper, but she plays it so in the moment and convincingly, and even if it is kind of loud and everything, it still feels naturalistic at the same time. It's a little bit in that mercurial area for me that I just find so fascinating in watching her.
Yeah, and I mean, and at the end, I mean, she also has a lot of quiet moments, and I think she does excellent facial work there. I mean, there's the scene where her study is flooded or something like this, and I don't know who is coming, and he's talking to her, and she's just sitting on the ground and just, I don't even remember if she's looking at him or looking somebody else, but there's so much pain on her face and so much anger at the same time, so much confusion. And I mean, you can understand where she is coming from. I mean, there are many scenes of other characters making her life hell. I mean, there's her mother, and there's this other scene with this, I don't know, this business guy who's basically telling her, no, it's Rodin and blah. And she's constantly trapped in a corner in some way, and she constantly tries to fight her way out of it with no success. So it is very easy to sympathize with her, but I don't think that Isabelle Adjani tries to make us like her.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I respect about her as an actress, because to your point, I think like an American sort of remake would try to do that, but she's very French, so she's like, I'm going to make this woman as complicated as possible. And
Great.
However you feel about her, I don't care. That's not my responsibility.
Yeah, love that for her.
Yes. That scene, I think, is so excellent that you just mentioned, and kind of like talking about how she was refusing any help that Rodin was trying to extend to her, even though she's just living in total squalor by this point. And she's just in such despair over how her life has turned out. And it's really intense, just the level of emotional vulnerability she goes to. And she's like sobbing to this, whoever that is, like a businessman who's visiting her. And then it leads to her eventually leaving her house to attend this exhibition featuring her art with this like garish white makeup on her face, almost like whatever happened to Baby Jane in a little bit, which really highlights how far gone she is. And for as loud and as over the top as that scene could be, she's so effective, I think, in the moment where she sees her brother and him just not wanting anything to really do with her. He's not interested in engaging with her anymore. So yeah, it's a real roller coaster, especially in the third act, just watching this woman kind of fall apart before your eyes. But I can't ask for a better French actress at this time than Isabelle Adjani to deliver those emotions and not have it feel too garish, I think.
Yeah, totally. And we haven't even talked about her brother yet.
Mm.
I like how vague, personally, I would say the relationship is portrayed.
Yes.
So I don't think there's anything going on, but from the way she acts there, sometimes had the feeling was
Yeah.
a kind of a nice touch by her, made the character even more complex and fascinating.
Yeah. I don't know the full story there of the real life relationship, so I don't want to
Yeah.
touch on anything that could have been sensitive there. But yeah, really, really fascinating film. I do think, yeah, like, it could have been tighter, perhaps, and maybe if they had explored a little further of the journey of her from being so adoring of this man to just snapping against him very suddenly could have been nuanced a little bit. But Isabelle Adjani, excellent performance. What can I say? One of the best of this lineup.
Yeah, I didn't remember her to be so strong. I somehow remembered that she goes big in the last part of the movie, but I didn't. I forgot about all the connections to the first part and all this character work that she does here. And I mean, at the end, when there's this voiceover and I think she reads this letter out of this this asylum or where they put her.
Yeah.
You really need for this moment to be effective and to really hit you emotionally. Everything before that needs to have done really well, and she did that. So this final voiceover really hits you in the guts.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of a tough watch from this lineup. Obviously it is lengthy, but I think the journey is worth it just to go on with this woman. So shall we move on to our next nominee?
Let's.
Okay. Pauline Collins in Shirley Valentine. So, this is a relatively unique one we have here. Pauline Collins is a British actress who came from mostly TV work for decades, and eventually she got this Oscar nomination, but she never really had a big Hollywood moment after this, and she never really contended for anything else, so this was her big moment of being recognized, at least internationally. So Pauline Collins, born in Britain, she went into teaching before she did acting, and she made her stage debut in 1962. She also made her first film, Secret of a Windmill Girl, an exploitation film, in 1966. And she continued with stage work, but she also did a lot of TV, including Doctor Who, and she got a BAFTA for her breakout TV performance in Upstairs Downstairs in the 70s. Fast forward through to the late 80s, and she stars in the play Shirley Valentine, which is a one-woman show, which won her a Tony Award in 1989, the same year that this film adaptation comes out. Of course, the studio wanted a bigger name for this film adaptation. According to Pauline herself, she said that they wanted Cher for the role, or Tracy Ullman. Also, Harvey Fierstein was interested in it. I mean, like, all different takes on this character. But Pauline was luckily able to reprise the role, and the rest is history. So, Shirley Valentine tells the story of Shirley Valentine, played by Pauline, a 42-year-old housewife living in Liverpool who's grown bored of her life. She often breaks the fourth wall in telling us her life story that led her to this point. She feels taken advantage of by her husband and her kids until one day when her friend Jane asks her to go with her on a trip for two to Greece for 2 weeks, and Shirley is hesitant at first but decides that she has nothing to lose, and she just goes for it. And when she's there, she meets a Greek tavern owner, and the two decide to have an affair. And it's all about Shirley kind of self-actualizing and figuring out what she wants in life. So, let us talk Pauline Collins. This is our only one-off, I believe, of this group to only get the one nomination here. So, thoughts on Pauline Collins and her performance here?
So I cannot talk too much about Pauline Collins herself. I'm not saying it's her fault. I'm just not very familiar with British television.
Right.
I know when I was a very small gay, I watched Upstairs Downstairs with my mother, but I don't remember any of it, and I couldn't tell you who Pauline Collins was. I saw from a Wikipedia page that she was apparently in Albert Nobbs.
Yes, she was in Albert Nobbs.
Yeah, okay, but I also don't remember that.
Me neither.
But I mean, good for her that she got this success. That I think she also won a Olivier Award for this when she did the play in London.
Yeah.
So yeah, good for her. The movie, I watched this movie and it begins, and there is immediately this awful song, and I was immediately, oh, I bet this was nominated for an Oscar, and I immediately went online, and of course it was nominated for an Oscar. Yeah. I don't know, it's difficult to say. I would say there are certain types of movies. If it's an American movie, you immediately know it's a Neil Simon movie. And I think if it's a British movie, you immediately know it's a Billy Russell movie. They have this, haha, look how clever I am and how many one-liners I can put into one single conversation.
Yes, very cheeky.
Yes, and constantly without non-stop. It is a little bit Neil Simon. At the same time, it feels a little bit like a British version of Diary of a Mad Housewife.
Yeah, I thought
where
that
you have
too.
this central character who is very lonely, very badly treated, and everyone around her is a living caricature.
Mm-hmm.
And making it very hard for her to have any kind of fulfilling life. I mean, it's kind of like educating Rita. I think it's kind of funny that they wanted Cher for this, because Julie Walters, of course, always liked to tell that they wanted Dolly Parton for educating Rita. So these would have been very interesting movies.
Yeah.
And I mean, with educating Rita, when you watch the movie, you always sense that this was a two-person play, and they opened it up, but not very successfully. And with Shirley Valentine, you can sense that this was a one-woman show, and again, they opened it up, and again, not very successfully. I can imagine this. I can imagine this as a play that Pauline Collins on the stage. She has presence. She has this kind of quiet humor, sarcastic humor that probably can work for one evening. So I can imagine that you want to watch her alone on the stage for one evening. In the movie, again, by creating all these other characters, it's just, I mean, the daughter comes home, immediately falls into bed and says, "Mom, start cooking for me." And everyone is so horrible to her, the neighbor with the dog, and it's just always so forced the way these characters are written and the way Pauline Collins has to react to them, again, with all these one-liners, that it just feels tired after a while. So Pauline Collins really has a very difficult job. And I can also imagine that talking to an audience from a stage is probably much easier than talking directly into the camera. So I applaud her for doing this successfully. What I didn't like so much, or what I think didn't make any sense, was this whole aspect of her talking, for example, to the wall. They make a big deal out of her talking to a wall, but I don't think in the movie she never actually does it. I think at one point she says, "Oh, I like talking to the wall," but all the time she's talking to the camera. I can imagine on the stage again that there are some moments when she actually does talk to the wall because she's always alone. But in the movie, they have all these flashbacks that replace her monologues. I just don't think that this was a successful translation from stage to the screen. And I mean, in educating Rita, there were at least Michael Caine and Julie Walters who could help each other. Pauline Collins is all by herself. She really has no one in this movie to rely on. This is really all herself. And it is tough for her, but I think she does the most with it that she probably humanly is able to do.
Yeah, I agree. This does come from the same cinematic universe as Educating Rita. Um, Very much, obviously, same director, Lewis Gilbert. But yeah, I have no memory of seeing Pauline Collins in anything. I checked on Letterboxd to see what I've seen from her, and it's this and Albert Nobbs. So, and again, I can't really remember her in Albert Nobbs, so this felt like an entirely new actress arriving to the screen, which is also how it probably felt to American audiences, I'm sure, at this time. So, but I mean, I liked her here. I think she has a easy sort of likability. She's very affable, and I also think it's very apparent that, you know, she has been performing in this role for months on the stage. It's sort of like the Barbara Streisand and Funny Girl effect, where like a theater actor has just totally honed their performance and feels completely confident in all their choices and is able to pretty seamlessly just translate it to film. I don't think this is anywhere near what Barbara does in Funny Girl, don't get me wrong, but like in terms of like totally dazzling the screen the way she does. But I think Pauline is charming pretty much from the start, where, you know, she's bored, she's cheeky, she talks to the wall, at least she says she does, like you said. I think the only time she actually does talk to the wall is when she says, "Hello, wall," like at the very beginning, and that's about it. But yeah, speaking very directly to the camera and inviting us into her world, talking about her husband giving her grief if she doesn't make steak for him every Thursday. Like, that's one thing that she has like these little comments about, being like, "Thou shalt give thy fella steak every Thursday." You know, that's kind of like the humor that we're dealing with here. Yeah, and her neighbor is like asking if she knew her family was vegan, and she very quickly snaps back and she's like, "I thought you were still Church of England." You know, that's kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, it's
to
that
give
kind of movie.
to give the listener a sense of what we're talking about here. I think she's good with those little quips, and it does feel natural to her personality, having that sort of natural sense of humor in a lot of her dialogue. It does kind of get old after a while, ultimately, and I don't know if there's a whole lot of variation in her performance, even by the end when she has gone through this huge transformation.
I mean, I like it that she is not overly transformative. So this is not when we go back to our first lineup, this is not a Olivia de Havilland in the Heiress case where her character is completely different at the end than she was at the beginning. I mean, of course, it worked in the Heiress. I think it wouldn't have worked here. So I like that her change is small. I can't believe that she would come to this point where she realizes, okay, this doesn't work anymore. I'm going on this vacation. I'm not gonna tell my husband. I'm gonna do this for the first time in my life. And then I even decide to stay in Greece and have the kind of life I want. I can believe this, but yeah, it is repetitious very often because it is just so many one-liners after one-liners, and she is quirky, and it doesn't allow her too often to be very emotional or vulnerable.
Yeah.
I like this moment she has on the beach where she is really realizing this isn't the life I want. And she says something like, "I fell in love with the idea of living." And she realizes, okay, I tasted this different life, and what am I going to do now? And I really wish there would have been more of moments like this. I can imagine that she probably had more of these moments on the stage, but I feel because so many scenes with other characters have been added, and all these other characters are always so quirky and so crazy and so over the top, that it makes it hard for her to stand out, apart from observing and saying, "Oh, this is quirky and this is strange."
Yeah, I think she excels more in those individual scenes of just herself, which is again the foundation of the play in terms of the dramatic arc of the film. Like when she is offered the chance to take this trip, there is this feeling she communicates, I find, of wanting to do it at first, but feeling like she's not really worthy of it. It's sort of like, oh, how nice that would be, but like that's for other people, not me. And I think it's trickier than it looks to thread that needle of being confident in her little world and making her little jokes and that sort of quippy, happy nature she has, while also showing that her self-esteem has been gradually drained out of her over the years of being a housewife and not feeling appreciated. So, I love those quiet moments when the film kind of relaxes with the one-liners and just allows her to emote on her face, the journey to self-actualization for her.
It's like when I don't know, when her husband is pushing his plate towards her, and then her own plate falls on her lap, and then all the food is on her lap, and then that's when she gets up and just opens the closet with the grease picture, and this is like, okay, we know this is now her decision, she is going, and yeah, and I like that. I always compared it to Diary of a Mad Housewife, and I think Diary of a Mad Housewife is probably even more over the top than Shirley Valentine, but I felt it gave Carrie Snodgrass somehow a bigger arc because it felt more like a satire than Shirley Valentine did. I was never really sure what Shirley Valentine wants to be and wants to say.
Yeah, that is probably my overall issue with, the issue that I'm taking with Pauline Collins is probably more of an issue of how they tried to expand this story. And I do feel like all of the expansions beyond the play, which I haven't read, I haven't seen, but from what I could imagine, the expansions feel like a little more amateurish, I guess, than the foundation of the text here. But yeah, obviously when she's flying off with Jane, who ends up abandoning her to like chase this fling, I love on the airplane how she's like, it's fine. I'll go ahead and go off on my own and sort of like chart my own course, which sort of makes sense for the character because even though she's in a new place and she doesn't know it very well, she also doesn't want to be bogged down by other people's plans. Like, this is all about her to take time for herself, and she's just gonna seize it, and I love how she kind of does take to it right away. We see her on that beach just living in the moment, enjoying herself, and she is like going to this bar when she sips wine by the sea and talks to the camera about how feeling like she's kind of has wasted her life. And that is where I definitely wish we could just see her communicate more than just like telling us explicitly personally, because she's just like, I feel like we already know by this point that she's feeling down on herself. And then when she does end up just like talking to the camera about how like, God, I've wasted my life, I'm just like, yeah, I already know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably more poignant when you watch her on the stage and she says, I've wasted my life, but you don't really know anything about her backstory apart from what she said to you. So you can always take it with a little bit of grain, what she says. But when you see how awful everyone around her is, you're like, yeah, took you a long time to realize that.
Yeah. Also, the stuff with Tom Conti as her Greek love interest is not my favorite. I'm curious your take on that relationship because I was not a big fan.
I mean, it feels like kind of he had to be there. So you kind of expect her when she goes to Greece alone that she has this fling. And I love how even the Wikipedia page and the summary of the movie, it's like they make passionate love or something like this, or they even emphasize how wild the love making is. Yeah, I mean, she has to experience that for one time. I think he just had to be there, and of course he would turn out to be not a love interest for a longer time. Of course, when she goes, then he will start the same thing with the next lonely tourist.
Right.
But I like how she is kind of, oh yeah, well, I expected you to be a little bit of a shithead, so that's fine for me. Can I work here?
I think I just don't find Tom Conti to be very convincing in this role.
Yeah, okay, that's that's a different.
but it's very also just this relationship is very stereotypical. Like, man from a foreign land provides a sexual awakening for visiting English woman. Maybe I've just been spoiled by like so many of these types of movies over the years, but I don't know. I just don't feel too much of a spark between them, unfortunately. But she does play that awakening pretty well, I think, of appreciating him for letting her come to the conclusion that she wants to have sex with him. And they have this like very erotic day of swimming naked and having sex and very developing these fast feelings. So again, it's actually, like you said, it is an incremental change in her, but part of me does wish there was slightly more of a dramatic heft to
Yeah.
the film to make us really feel that. But over
Yeah.
time, she does develop a more, I think, maybe thoughtful sensibility as she discovers she might actually want to stay there and she dreads having to go back home, which is a very common thing. But I like that you can definitely see a change a little bit
Yeah.
in her spirit, more of a certainty in knowing what she wants, even if it is very subtle.
I mean, yeah, it would have been nice if she had been given more room to develop. I mean, when I'm on holiday, I also don't want to go home.
Right.
But it would have been nice to see more of her coming to this conclusion. And I mean, also with the love affair, I mean, she is cheating on her husband for probably the first time in her life.
Yeah.
Just a little bit more how this affects her and how she comes to this point. I mean, I like the conversation they're having outside when he's telling her, I make bleep on a boat and we bleep on a boat and these other tourists come by and she's kind of, that's funny. Where she's again this kind where she again is more observing and herself commentating on what is going on. And this is probably the biggest challenge she has, because she's like this, somehow she's a Greek chorus in her own story. So she's constantly commentating about what is happening and about what is happening to her. Then sometimes difficult to actually show us what is happening to her, if this makes any sense.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good point. Her husband tries to reason with her, which mostly involves him blaming menopause for all of this. But eventually he kind of mans up and goes to visit her in Greece, and he doesn't recognize her at first, but she does get her kind of triumphant line at the end where she tells him quite plainly, like, I used to be a mother, I used to be the wife, but now I'm Shirley Valentine again. And it sort of leaves it open-ended as to what happens next, but the prevailing sense that I get is that she's now in a much more confident place than she was before, and no matter what path she might choose, whether she stays in Greece or if she goes back home with her husband, that she won't be afraid of charting her own path with some level of confidence, and that she'll be okay, which is nice. It's a nice thing.
For her, yeah. It's nice for her. But it is kind of funny that her husband is not recognizing her, because, I mean, it's not like she looks any different.
Yeah, I think she's just like wearing sunglasses, maybe.
Yeah.
Speaks to his cluelessness.
Yes. No matter what I think of the movie or the performance, she has one of the best Oscar clips ever. I don't know if you've seen the video of Jessica Tandy's win with the clips. So it's the scene where she's screaming after her daughter about how I'm gonna have sex for breakfast, sex for supper, sex for tea, and sex for dinner.
Yeah, that's a good moment that definitely pops on the show.
Yeah. And I mean, good for her for doing it.
Yes, good for her indeed.
Yes.
Yeah, solid work from Pauline Collins. I wish I could be a little bit more excited about it.
I mean, she couldn't do much more with the material.
Yeah.
But yeah, the material is just not there.
Well, on that note, shall we move on to our next nominee?
Yes, please.
Alrighty. Jessica Lange in Music Box. So this is Jessica Lange's 5th Oscar nomination, putting her right alongside Meryl Streep and Glenn Close as actresses who totally dominated the 80s with at least 5 Oscar nominations. So after those nominations earlier in the 80s, she had a bit of a low-key period heading into the close of the decade. She's in Crimes of the Heart, but she wasn't nominated for anything there. She was in Far North and Everybody's All-American, but neither made a dent really critically or commercially. And then she stars here in Music Box, which is a collaboration of Costa Gavras and Joe Esterhaas. Esterhaas wrote the screenplay after discovering that his father committed anti-Semitic war crimes in Hungary. So he went about writing a screenplay here about a child sort of coping with the possibility that their father was a war criminal. So the film is all about Anne Talbot, played by Jessica Lange, a defense attorney who decides to defend her father, Michael Laszlo, a Hungarian immigrant who's been accused of war crimes during World War II against Jews. So she goes about trying to prove his innocence, even as survivors and those who were there at the time with him assert that it was definitely Laszlo who did it. and it's kind of a mystery leading up to the end whether or not her father did indeed do the crimes. So let's get to it here. Jessica Lange, thoughts on the great Jessica Lange overall and her Oscar success, especially in the 80s here, and her performance here in Music Box?
Love Jessica Lange. Definitely one of my favorites. I love the restless energy that she has. You sometimes feel that she has almost too much energy on the screen, and it always needs to come out in all these different ways. You have a feeling her body is always moving. She's kind of always moving her head from the left to the right, her whole body. And I love how she plays with dialogue. I mean, even in stuff like Feud, which is not a great show, but I think she is really great in it. She's not Joan Crawford, but she is a very specific version of a Hollywood diva. And the way she plays with dialogue is really very unique. I love that she had this career renaissance, that she has the triple crown of acting. I even loved her in Tootsie. I'm even one of the few people who will say she was great in that, and I'm totally fine with her Oscar win. And there is just something about her, a very strong screen presence that I absolutely adore. And I think Louis Fertel on your 69 episode, he said, I don't know if he said this exactly, that if you want to be insulted, you want to be insulted by Jane Fonda or something like this. And yes. I want to be insulted by Jessica Lange. I want Jessica Lange to tell me to F off.
While she's holding a cigarette.
Maybe, yeah. That is all I want from life. Yeah, Music Box, probably not her most memorable movie. It feels very standard courtroom drama. There are the surprise witnesses, there's last minute evidence, there's this personal connection of the lawyer. There's a rather, I would say, predictable ending, so not sure if anybody was really surprised. I would say that even the movie probably wants to pay tribute to victims of the Holocaust, but I would say sometimes it rather downplays them, and it feels the whole Holocaust is just a backstory to the personal drama between Jessica Lange and her father. So I sometimes feel it would have been better if it had been a strict courtroom drama, if it had focused on the victims, or if it had focused just on the relationship between Jessica Lange and her father, but it somehow wanted to do all of this and feels a bit muddled because all of this. But what I do like very much is that somehow Music Box is kind of a best of Jessica Lange collection. There is a scene where she is threateningly whispering to somebody with this danger in her eyes. There is a scene where she grabs somebody by their arms and pushes them against the wall. And she does this Jessica Lange thing where she is somehow then smaller and look upwards while she's screaming, and then she's bigger and looks downwards while she's screaming. There is even a moment where she says, "Me." And I don't know if you have ever seen a Blue Sky yet. This movie has one of the most iconic line deliveries ever, with where she says, "Me." And she does this also in Music Box. And so it's kind of a best of everything you want from Jessica Lange, you get from Jessica Lange in this one movie.
Yeah, that's kind of true. This was a fascinating watch, I have to say. It was actually kind of refreshing, at least from watching these in order with Jessica, to see her as a professional, like outside of her wheelhouse of rural, southern, soft-spoken, or Blanche Dubois even kind of performances. She's more of like a woman of the city. She's a yuppie. She has this kind of fast-talking lawyer speak, and maybe it's not the most natural for Jessica compared to those more Southern Gothic sort of ethereal types of roles that we love her for, but it is fun to see her in this kind of role. Speaking truthfully, though, I did feel like this wasn't necessarily a super noteworthy performance from her until the final act, similar to a little bit of Isabelle Adjani for me, where the best material for her, just actress-wise, is the end. But unlike with Isabelle Adjani, who I think is great, even in those subtler lead up to the third act, for me, Jessica Lange doesn't quite compel me. There are moments where it feels like a slight distance, I think, compared to some of her more lived-in work. I do appreciate that she is stretching here and showing different sides of her abilities. She does have a quote, actually, about how she approached the material, which I found very fascinating. She said, "There was nothing in my own experiences of betrayal, disappointment, and heartbreak that could compare to the characters. So instead of using a lot of technique, I tried to approach it as a child approaches a game of make-believe. I did do some research into the character's Hungarian background, and I read a lot of books about the Holocaust, but ultimately I relied on my own imagination. There was an ease to working this way, an effortlessness. And it's interesting because I don't know if it reads as effortless on screen for me, and it's hard to say whether she has a full grasp on the character. I think it's still good work on the whole, and the third act is pretty impactful, but for some reason, like, the lead up to that is just a little bit shakier than I'm used to seeing from her in terms of her being like this hard-nosed kind of lawyer type. I don't know if I'm as convinced by that as I should be.
I was also kind of skeptical because on the one hand, Jessica Lange has such a no bullshit attitude that a lawyer feels very natural for her. But on the other hand, she is such an unpredictable force of nature on the screen for most of the time that the restraints of the courtroom seem to hold her back various times. But I think it's
Right.
a kind of fascinating ambiguity here.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that the character itself is not really a lot. So it seems that Jessica Lange was really more or less handed a blank page by the director, and she was essentially asked to develop the character herself.
Yeah.
And you kind of sense that this is a blank page, that
Mm-hmm.
she essentially only could fill with her own presence. Yeah, there is not really too much to the character. So she is a lawyer. There's obviously the scenes with her father where she's constantly supporting him. The movie doesn't really take a long time to build anything up. We are essentially thrown right into it. I think it takes about 5 minutes for her to say, "Don't talk to my father like this." And
Right.
we are right into it. And yeah, I mean, the courtroom scenes are actually also, usually courtroom scenes are pretty showy for a lot of actors, but there's not really a lot that she is doing.
Mm.
I mean, I kind of like how she is always attacking the witnesses in a very civilized manner and trying to make them sound unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
So I could imagine her being a successful lawyer, but it just, yeah, it sometimes lacks a little bit of focus and real interest to keep me engaged.
Yeah.
I agree on that.
Well, we do certainly end up seeing the emotional depth that she excels in scenes with her father. I do think they have such a easy, relaxed energy. Like, even when they're just dancing at the beginning in the opening scene, like, and she's very protective when the other lawyers are making accusations that she feels are unfounded and unfair to him. This is a very subtle thing, but I like whenever she repeats back to him some of his more blunt statements, because she's kind of amused and there's like such affection in her tone. And in the beginning, she has this energy of like, I'm going to defend my father. We're going to clear this all up and things are going to be fine. And it's she's not panicked yet or like of having to deal with what could be the truth of this horrible stuff that has been accused of him. And so there is that feeling of her being a little bit, easy breezy, just not quite in the mode of being like having to confront these things that are horrific that he has withheld from her for so long. And so she does kind of ease into that creeping paranoia and that like guilt almost feeling that, oh, maybe what they're saying has a kernel of truth to it.
Yeah, I mean, I also like how she kind of mixes the professionalism that she usually has as a lawyer with her personal connection to the case. So she tries to be as professional as possible, but you can sense how it affects her personally. I mean, when, for example, you hear the testimonies of the witnesses and you see how it affects her, and she's this very serious big lawyer. She probably has heard a lot of terrible things, but you see how affected she is by this, by the ideas that her father might be connected to it, even though she doesn't want to believe it. And
Yeah.
I think she does this very well. I especially like the scene when she meets the lawyer from the other side and she invites him to this restaurant. And she is at first very casual and friendly to him. And then she, in this Jessica Lange way, slowly and whisperingly begins to attack him and then basically tells him, "Oh, didn't you kill your wife in a car crash when you were drunk? Is this why you are now trying to chase Nazis and to pay for your guilt? Is it this?" And he becomes upset and she is more like, "Ha, gotcha." And this is very typical Jessica Lange, and this is always I think, very fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think so too. I think her trying to sort of finesse him a bit at dinner as this tactic to come to an understanding and him eventually shutting it down and saying that she's too emotionally involved. Really interesting, probably true that she is too close to it, but she plays, I think, those changing dynamics of their conversation, her and the prosecutor, really well with that great mercurial flavor that Jessica really excels in. Again, I do just go back to the courtroom scenes, which I think I just find it hard for me in those scenes to not just see Jessica Lange playing a lawyer rather than her fully transforming into Anne. But I do think she does have, at the same time, a kind of quiet power that does draw you in. And yeah, her strategy and her like questioning to like have the witnesses express doubt in their certainty over her father being the one responsible, how they can't be certain that like this man that they saw once 40 years ago is in fact the man from this like photograph and the man sitting before them. It's interesting, and as a character, Anne is having to like thread the needle of not antagonizing the witness because that could backfire, but also prodding just enough to get them to express that doubt. And it works to varying effect depending on the witness, but I do think it, that little bit of back and forth, I think it suits Jessica's very responsive style of acting. I've mentioned on other episodes how I love how she is so responsive to other actors. Just that's kind of her thing. And those moments of just like subtly changing her strategy depending on what the other person is saying, I think those little moments, that's where I see the Jessica that I love.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like that she makes a very unlikable lawyer in a way. I mean, those witnesses, they have been through horrible things, and the way she just gets there with this friendly smile and is like, are you sure that's really how you remember it? And didn't this and this happen? And aren't you a little bit stretching the truth here? And really like needling them. And as you said, just to raise the slightest specter of doubt. She's obviously a good lawyer. That's what they do, but it doesn't make her likable. But she's really, you sense how determined she is to get her father out of this.
For sure. And even when we get to this whole section of the film where she goes to Hungary with the prosecutor and the judge, because there's a witness who claims to know her father and can testify to his crime, but Anne is able to sort of produce these signed documents of people claiming that 3 different men are this guy Mishka, who they think their father is, leading to the judge dismissing the case. And it seems like, cool, all is good. She's riding high. But then the prosecutor is kind of suggesting that, like, just because this is over doesn't mean that he just had a vendetta against her father, and that this was actually about, like, remembering the atrocities of what happened and trying to find justice. So that's a really compelling scene, which then leads to her continuing to try and find closure and full proof of her father's innocence. And it just kind of unravels from there, where she's meeting the sister of his friend who died and realizes to her shock that her father may have indeed been this guy's partner and members of the Arrow Cross, which leads her to a music box. Finally, the reveal of why this is called Music Box, which the guy had pawned off, but she is able to retrieve and finds the photos of her father when he was younger, torturing Jews. And her reaction and her like losing her breath in disbelief, I think, is very impactful.
Yeah.
Even if maybe you could see it coming, as you said before.
And I mean, her father conveniently always looking directly into the camera, whatever crime he is committing at this moment.
He always knew where the camera was.
Yes. No. Yeah, and I mean, the final confrontation is very good. As I already said, the way she grabs him, but also how she constantly moves away from him. So, but also then at the same time comes back to him and touching him, this conflict of emotions, how disgusted she is by him while still loving him as her father. I think this is very well played by her. You can really understand where she's coming from at this moment and how difficult for her it is to process all this.
Yeah. Her speaking very directly to him about his crimes, how he shot innocent people in the head. I do love when you see her kind of backing away from him as it goes on, because it's like she can hardly even bear it. and her just helplessly pleading for him to just finally own up to it and tell the truth. It's really striking because it's like a daughter realizing that the father she thought she knew is actually just a stranger. He had this whole other life that he kept from her. It's like her whole foundation has been rocked by this point, and like how does she even go on from there? So it is quite a disturbing ending ultimately,
Yeah.
but she plays the creeping dread of it really, really well. I think, again, like the emotional journey of Anne as a person, I really believe a lot more than Anne as a lawyer. But I do think that wounded quality in Jessica's voice is very affecting. So, yeah, I think this is material that feels a little bit like a TV movie
Yeah.
that you would see in the 90s, especially. But what she does is to help elevate it beyond just feeling run of the mill.
Yeah, I would say so too. And the movie benefits a lot from her chemistry with Armin Müller-Stahl,
Yes.
who I think also gives a pretty good performance. And I
Yeah.
like how,
Surprised to not see him nominated,
yeah,
honestly.
and I like how even at the ending, when the evidence is clear out there on the table, he still remains this 100%, no, that wasn't me, and no, I didn't do that, and how completely focused he is on this one lie. Yeah, I think this works pretty well with Jessica Lange. So there are different acting styles and different personalities. They fit quite well.
Yeah. So solid work from Jessica Lange. Again, not necessarily my favorite, but interesting to see her stretching a little bit beyond what she had done prior. Anything else before we get to our final nominee, or losing nominee at least?
Yeah, no, yeah, we come to the big ones.
Yes, we have. It's all been leading up to these final two, I guess. Alrighty. Michelle Pfeiffer in The Fabulous Baker Boys. Michelle Pfeiffer is another one of those actresses where I'm annoyed that I only have the opportunity to really talk about her on this show 2 times. Of course, listeners know that I did already cover her a few months ago on A Woman Robbed, my bonus series, for her snubbed performance as Miss Selena Kyle in Batman Returns. But it's only this and Love Field that she was nominated for in lead, which is a shame because she is one of the best actresses of her generation. So, just to introduce her a little bit here, Michelle was born in California and she pursued acting after appearing in beauty contests. She appeared in supporting roles in the late 70s, heading into the 80s, before she had her first major acting moment as the lead of Grease 2, which wasn't super well received necessarily. But after that, she landed a role in Scarface in 1983, which she got good notices for that. And she continued with some success, some failure. She was in The Witches of Eastwick with Cher and Susan Sarandon. And then 1988 was a big year for her where she was the lead of Married to the Mob and also starred in Dangerous Liaisons, which we talked about last week. And she got her first Oscar nomination for that in supporting actress, and she won a BAFTA. And then her very next role here is The Fabulous Baker Boys. There were, of course, other actresses as possibilities for this role, including Whitney Houston, Jodie Foster, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and everyone's favorite alternate casting of the 80s, Deborah Winger. But yeah, the director, Steve Kloves, really wanted Michelle, and she was hesitant at first to dive into another prestige-y kind of project, but she was ultimately convinced because of the quality of her character, and she underwent some intense vocal training because she does all her own singing in the film. So let's get to a summary here. The Fabulous Baker Boys stars Jeff Bridges and Beau Bridges, the Bridges brothers, as Jack and Frank Baker, a musical duo of lounge performers who have a dual piano act. Their prime is very much behind them, so they decide to spice up their act by adding a female singer, and they audition a bunch before hiring Susie Diamond, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who's a former escort with a great voice, and she helps to revive interest in the act, but things become complicated when Jack and Susie have a fling, and tension starts to form over time. So, let's talk Michelle Pfeiffer. Fritz, thoughts on the great Michelle Pfeiffer and her performance here?
So, like every good film tutor gay, I worship at the feet of Michelle Pfeiffer.
Very good.
I would definitely say that she was one of my first actress obsessions. So Batman Returns was my VHS of Batman Returns was basically watched every day. And the fact that Catwoman came back in that final shot was always so important to me.
Yes,
And yeah, I
totally.
was so obsessed with Selina Kyle, and yeah, my main reason for watching this movie. So I don't know. I think together with Faye, I think Faye Dunaway was one of my early obsessions. Catherine Hepburn, and then Natalie Wood and Vita Moreno from West Side Story. They all raised me and introduced me to actressing,
Ugh,
and
the women
always
who
will.
raised us.
Yes, will always be grateful to Michelle Pfeiffer for this. Now I'm gonna make myself very unpopular.
Oh
Um,
no.
that I think Michelle Pfeiffer is great in The Fabulous Baker Boys. Don't get me wrong. I personally don't get why she is so highly praised as she is. I will say this right away. The Fabulous Baker Boys, I know we will talk a lot about cliches when we talk about the next movie, but I have to say, watching The Fabulous Baker Boys, I don't know, it was like, of course they are playing in this bar and nobody is listening to them and people are laughing and talking very loud. And then, of course, they have this audition process where the other women are not only bad, but they are ridiculously bad. And of course, Susie Diamond comes late and she swears and she falls into the door. And of course, the two of them roll their eyes at her and nobody expects her to be good. But then, of course, she is very good. And of course they will fall in love, and of course there will be a scene where Beau Bridges has to leave them alone at this hotel, and they use this opportunity to hook up. So yeah, I want to say I don't know, I'm not the biggest fan of the movie. I know it has a lot of fans, and I know it's respected very much. I'm not a big fan of the script per se, I would say, and the direction, but I do say the cinematography and the three main principal cast members, mainly Michelle Pfeiffer and Jeff Bridges, they make this movie come alive. So it is definitely a very good movie. I just personally feel it has quite its flaws,
Mm.
but I will say that Michelle Pfeiffer gives a glorious movie star performance. She is, I don't know, Rita Hayworth or Marilyn Monroe with a modern spin. We have this era of these 80s erotic thrillers, but her work is much more subtle and more like a throwback to the 40s. And she has this very natural beauty that I adore, but she combines it with this no bullshit attitude. So there's really a lot going on. And it is a great performance, but I can say right away, I'm not that much over the moon as many other people are about it. Yeah, we will probably talk about this quite a lot. I personally feel I wish it was more her movie than it is. So I don't give her any fault for this. I think she does probably everything with the role you can do. Her singing scenes are amazing. She gives a lot of depth to it. I just wish the movie had been more interested in her, or at least as much interested in her as it is in Jeff Bridges.
Wow. Drag the Fabulous Baker Boys. Jeez.
I'm very sorry. But I think after Louise Reiner, I can say anything.
Right, exactly. um, yes, so I love Michelle Pfeiffer. I think she's someone who continues to prove her greatness even all these years later. And in this stage of her career, it's like she is one of the most beautiful women in the world, and she got attention for that. But part of that, as people like Marilyn Monroe can attest to, is that sometimes people don't take them seriously. And I think she just kept having to prove in the 80s that she was more than just her beauty and more than just the love interest, that she could be a compelling lead all on her own. And even though The Fabulous Baker Boys is more about the Baker Boys, obviously, and their relationship over time, I do think Michelle really goes above and beyond what's asked of her and draws so much more of your attention. I think Jeff and Beau are really good here too. You definitely feel that family history, but Michelle is able to do even more without even the benefit of being too much of the focus of the film. And I just find her mesmerizing here. I think she makes that cool, sort of cynical energy seem natural and almost effortless. Her singing voice has so much personality, I find, just like the smokiness there, the sultriness. And she is revealing those layers over time of having to put up with so much because of her past and as this escort, and how hard it is for her to make like genuine deep connections with another person. I do think that's compelling, even if it is ultimately cliched. Yeah, as a character, it's definitely an archetype, and the whole call girl who has to hustle and do what she has to do to get by. And also she has this hidden pain beneath that tough exterior and all that. I get that. It's very standard from a writing standpoint. But I find that she brings a lot of nuance within even the contours of her character that makes it not just feel two-dimensional.
I mean, I don't want to come across as a hater. As I said, she's definitely great. I think sometimes
Yeah.
it's just that you go into a movie with some preconceived ideas, and knowing how awarded this performance is and how everybody loves it, I think I'm just a little bit like Patricia Arquette in Boyhood, and I just thought there would be more.
Wow.
And I don't blame Michelle Pfeiffer. I think she does get everything out of this role that you can. I just personally don't feel it's that compelling. Is that the right word? I don't know. Personally, I mean, it doesn't happen very often that I'm more interested in an actor than an actress when I watch a movie. But I personally think Jeff Bridges gives me more here, even though I know that Susie is obviously the scene stealer, and obviously the character we are drawn to. And I mean, she does get a lot of opportunities. She has this star entrance, of course, at the audition where she comes in late. When she starts singing for the first time, I think we hear her before we see, not the first time, when she has this the first performance where she has this very funny scene where she turns on the microphone and she swears while turning it on. Again, cliche, but it is funny, and she sells it. And then, of course, she's on the floor with her little cards, and then she starts singing, and then she rises, and then she appears in front of the camera while rising from above. So the whole movie is obviously made to worship Michelle Pfeiffer and to worship the character of Susie, and I totally love that. Yeah, I think it's just that I wish the character would go a little bit more beyond the kind of expected route that we have. So you kind of sense that she will fall in love with Jeff Bridges. You sense that they will break up at some point, and it will not be an easy relationship between them. I love that she has this no bullshit attitude, that she is even to him, so that she never becomes like the suffering girlfriend cliche. She's very much always her own person.
Yeah.
And because the writing is not so great for her, everything that makes Susie great comes directly from Michelle Pfeiffer. That's definitely true. And she does a lot with this character. And as I already said, her singing is fantastic. I mean, making Whoopi, it is a moment. It lives up to the legends that surround it.
Yeah.
It is a great performance. I think that maybe, I have listened to all of your podcast episodes. I listen to them at the gym and when I'm doing my little workout sessions. And there are so many times when I think, when you talk about a performance that I think is absolutely amazing, and you or your guests say, "Oh, I don't know, I don't like that one so much," and I'm like, "What?" And no, I think, okay, now it's my turn.
The tables have turned, I
Yes.
suppose. Not well, I think what you're saying is not entirely wrong in the sense that the character is just that archetype, but I do think she elevates it so much and is able to do different things with it than you might expect. She has such an alluring look in the beginning. She has that great rock star kind of coolness. Like when Frank is making a crack at her about her being late and how you can't do that in show business, and she looks around at her environment and she kind of cringes and she's like, this is show business. I think those tiny little moments like that are very funny, and she casually admits that she has experience as an escort, and she doesn't seem to have any shame in that when she mentions that, which I love. And then her singing with that sultriness and this personality really coming through, I think she does make a very big first impression. And yeah, that first gig with them in this, like her showing up in this very tacky, very aggressively 80s outfit, which says a lot about her personality, her love of dressing up and attracting attention. That's really fun. And their first performance, like you mentioned, starts pretty disastrously, but she plays the comedy of that with more of that cool energy. It's not like she's even mortified at all. She just goes about picking up all her notes without much care for how horribly the show is going. But then, yeah, when she opens up and starts singing, she has such an incredible Marilyn Monroe in Some Like It Hot kind of allure. And I feel like the audience is just like the audiences we see in the film, where you just can't really take your eyes off her. But what's key is that she also knows her worth. Like, she isn't surprised by her success and her talent. and she feels like she should be compensated as such, like her proposing how they can get more money from their gigs. Like she does take an agency in it, so it's not like she is just an extension of the Baker Boys necessarily.
Yeah, no, definitely. And when she's performing, I mean, she has this kind of screen presence that you cannot learn or cannot acquire. You really need to have it, and she does have it. I mean, you are drawn to her and she catches your attention. And I mean, it's not just when she's lying on the piano, it's in general when she's performing, but also when she is with Jeff Bridges and Beau Bridges. Yes, there is a natural center of attention in her, and definitely your attention is drawn to her. And my attention is always drawn to her. And I love how she puts how she doesn't make her, also, she doesn't overplay her backstory. So she never feels like she is overly regretting anything, or how she still sad about things. I'm sure a lot of other actresses might have constantly put in some opportunities to show you, oh, she is so full of regret and full of sadness. And I like that she doesn't do this, that she is very, as you said, very much her own person and very much knows what she is worth. And how in this final confrontation scene with Jeff Bridges in his apartment, how she is very aggressive towards him, while you can sense at the same time that she hopes that he tells her to stay, which he doesn't. But she doesn't show it. So there is a lot that she does with this role. Absolutely. Again, I just wish she would have been given more.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I wish that too as well. I wish it was entirely from her perspective, honestly. But the relationship with Jack is fascinating to track. Her speaking very bluntly to him a lot, like when he asks her to walk her home, and she's basically like, look, we should keep this professional. If we got together, it would complicate things. Which, of course, as you might expect with a film like this, that's exactly what happens. As you already mentioned, like you can kind of see what the arc will be for this relationship just from the start. But I think it's remarkable how even in those smaller moments like that, she just does communicate this wealth of experience with past relationships, and also her attitude doesn't feel like posturing or her acting tough or whatever. Like she is just fully formed from the beginning, and I think she resists what the film could have been, which is that Susie is the girl, between the three of them. And even when she's not the focus of a scene, I feel like there's such a playfulness in her eyes and how she reacts. Like one example I think is great for her is when they're on the balcony at the hotel and Frank is sort of delving into their backstory, and she makes so many little comments, like when Frank says that he learned how to slow dance from his brother, and she makes this little remark and being like, I didn't know you guys were so close. Just these fun little sarcastic jabs like that, or show just how she observes the two of them. And Michelle obviously has this like cat-like face, for lack of a better word, and she's able to express a lot with a little. And you can see when Jack is sort of slow dancing with her, it's nice at first, but then she gradually pulls away because she doesn't want to get hurt and she doesn't want to complicate things, even if she's attracted to him.
Yeah.
And yes, all of what I'm saying has been seen before. I acknowledge that. But what she does with it, I think, is unique.
No, she definitely fits in very well with the group. So she has a kind of amused, sarcastic quality that works with both more Beau Bridges, more like, I don't know, more like comic relief character. Sometimes he feels like it. And of course, more with Jeff Bridges' cynical attitude. So she works very well with both of them. And you constantly have a feeling that she's smarter than both of them, which I also like.
Yeah, oh, totally. I think she is, for me, the window into the film.
Yes.
Personally. So, yeah, to revisit what you mentioned, the scene where she sings Making Whoopee, a hot scene. I'm just going to say it, like total hot girl shit right there, knowing exactly what she's doing. She's got the red dress. She's on the piano. She's flirting with Jack even as he's playing the piano. And it's just magnetic. I think the confidence she has in knowing how effective her talent is in that moment is so captivating. And it's, I think, natural that it leads to her and Jack finally giving way to those pent up feelings and having sex. But also, this is where she opens up to Jack about her past as an escort and her liking older men because they were more polite and, enjoying the sort of rich lifestyle that she would be kind of adjacent to by going with these guys. And very conversational in her tone, even with this long monologue that she has about like going to hotels and like looking in the mirror and being disappointed that she's still the same old Susie. And I think she just does a really great job of showing how her walls are lowering in his company, but not all the way. Like she is still speaking with that cynical sarcasm, but like that cool sort of above it all attitude is slipping away because she is trusting him, because she is revealing these very intimate details. And I think she makes that feel natural and not totally out of character for what she would do.
No, definitely. I think everything she always does in the movie is very in character. And I think what you said about her confidence is probably key to her whole performance. So she knows, Michelle Pfeiffer knows how she looks like, and she knows that she can sing, and she knows that she has screen presence. So she never draws any attention to it. This comes very natural from her. And I think for a role like this, in a movie like this is very essential, and probably why she fits so well into this environment.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, they both realize, especially her, that this has complicated their dynamic. And Frank, of course, catches on pretty quickly that they slept together. I did want to pinpoint a very fun, ironic comment that you may have also noticed, perhaps on your watch, where Frank is mad that they messed with the set list while he was away. And he says, "The cat goes away for the night and the mice conduct the orchestra." And then Susie says, "I'm not a mouse."
Yeah.
Which plays very differently now compared to then, knowing that she would very soon after this be Catwoman. So
Yeah.
she is indeed not a mouse.
No, she's definitely not. No, it's funny, but she also plays it like this. Susie Diamond is not a mouse.
She sure isn't.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
even if she needs this job, and even if it's important for her, she will not change who she is for this job and for these guys.
Exactly.
And again, that's another thing that Michelle Pfeiffer really does very well.
Yep. And also, of course, it feels like Susie's definitely caught feelings for him because she stops by his neighborhood to see him again. They have sex again, but as it turns out, she is looking to leave the group so that she can take a gig recording commercial jingles for cat food. Another cat reference. Anyway, I'll stop. But she is not exactly like wanting to leave, but it is a good opportunity just financially for her, and she's looking to see what he has to say about it. I do love that scene where Jack is like, "There's always another girl," and you see her heart just shatter, and they confront each other on the street, and he's very cruel to her and is totally dismissing their experience together, how she has just, she revitalized their act and he doesn't seem to care. And she talks about how like he has this other passion as a jazz musician, but he keeps his passion buried, and he refuses to really express his emotions to other people. And she talks about knowing all about that, having gone through that herself, how she buries those traumatic experiences in this empty place. And when she says, like, you do it long enough and all you are is empty, I think that's the moment that really crystallizes this performance for me, how she's toughened herself up so much over the years, because if she were to face those past experiences directly, it would just be too much for her to bear.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a strong part of her performance, and you sense how you said, how this toughening up guides her, but you never sense that it is somehow difficult for her. So she has definitely adjusted herself to the life that she is leading now and the kind of person she has become. And she's fine with that. And she's not willing, just as much as Jeff Bridges' character is unwilling to kind of change for her or make concessions for her, I think she is just as much her own person. And you don't sense that she would probably make a few steps towards him if he would make one step towards her, but she wouldn't become a totally different person just for the sake of him.
Exactly. And, I think after that, she basically disappears from the narrative and we don't follow her in her new gig. So it's a lot of focus on the Baker Boys. But when we do finally check in on her at the end, again, when Jack is visiting her to catch up, she's clearly not loving her new job, but it's a living and they sort of make amends. Nothing outstanding there, but I was just struck by how she's able to express so much just with a few looks. And this is not to shade the Bridges brothers here, but compared to her, they're just not as compelling for me, at least, where she just fills in so much. So I really am a big fan of this performance. Not necessarily that it's a top tier of the decade necessarily, but I think she is one of the definitions of like someone who is able to take a somewhat limited role and just make a total meal out of it in her performance. So that's what great acting can be.
Yeah, and again, definitely, she gets everything out of this role and even more just by sheer presence. And I agree that at the end, when she comes back for the small scene after she's been away for so long, it is kind of a finally moment for you as the viewer, because you're just waiting for her to come back. And yeah, as you said, I wish this whole movie would have been just about her.
Should have been Susie and the Baker Boys.
Yes, just Susie.
Or just Susie. Just Susie.
Just, yeah.
Shall we move on to our winner?
Yes, let's.
Alrighty. Jessica Tandy in Driving Miss Daisy. So Jessica Tandy is our final Best Actress winner of the 80s, and definitely for me feels like a true end of an era, especially when you look at the winners that would follow her in the 90s, but we'll get into that next season. So Jessica Tandy was born in London. She was an English actress who got her start on the stage in 1927 and did a lot of plays on the West End. Most of her career would be on the stage, but she did make a decent run in film as well. Most notably on the stage, we discussed way back in the 1951 episode. She was the original Blanche Dubois in the Broadway production of A Streetcar Named Desire, for which she won a Tony, and she was not able to take that performance to film, unlike the other three in the cast, unfortunately. Who knows what would have happened if, it were her in the role instead of Vivien Leigh, but either way, she won a Tony, so she got some hardware for it at least. But she did supporting roles in the 40s in The Seventh Cross, The Valley of Decision, which we talked about on this show, Dragonwyck. But most of her work in the next few decades was on the stage, and she won more Tonys for The Gin Game and Foxfire. So then she had this kind of career resurgence in film in the early 80s, appearing in The World According to Garp, The Bostonians, another one we've talked about, Cocoon, Batteries Not Included, and she won an Emmy for the TV movie adaptation of Foxfire. And then she got this prime role here in Driving Miss Daisy, which got her the Triple Crown of acting with this Oscar. So Driving Miss Daisy started as a play with Dana Ivey in the role, and there were quite a few actresses, younger even, and older, of course, who were considered as possibilities and who wanted to do the film, like Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, Lucille Ball, Lauren Bacall, Angela Lansbury. But Bruce Beresford, the director, was insistent on Jessica Tandy, and let's talk about her performance. So the film tracks the story of Daisy Worthen, played by Jessica Tandy, an elderly Jewish widow living in Georgia in 1948, and her platonic relationship with her black chauffeur, Hoke, played by Morgan Freeman, over the course of 25 years. And at first she is unfriendly towards him, but gradually over time she starts to soften and comes to value him as a friend, and they live through tumultuous times in the South. So let's talk our winner, Jessica Tandy, Driving Miss Daisy. Fritz, thoughts on Miss Tandy and this film that is definitely not among the most beloved of Best Picture winners, but what are your thoughts?
Again, I'm not too familiar with Jessica Tandy, so I know her career Renaissance movies you just mentioned. Of course, I've seen her as Gregory Peck's bitchy wife in Valley of Decision. Of course, you would have to choose Greer Garson instead of her. Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
And yeah, no, don't know too much about her. Fried green tomatoes and things like this. And yeah, as you said, more of a stage presence. I mean, Sweet Tony's is nothing to sneer at. More than, for example, Helen Hayes, who is the first lady of the stage. So Jessica Tandy did quite well for herself. While watching this movie, I had the feeling, for me, she feels a little bit like, and I know she is, she's British, right?
Yep.
But she still feels a little bit more American. I don't know why, but she feels like an equivalent of Judi Dench in a way that they both have this kind of quiet dignity and strength and can command attention simply by presence and simply by their sheer force of talents. I mean, there was this Graham Norton clip that was just going around of Judi Dench where she is joking with the other guest, and then from 1 second to the next, she starts quoting the Shakespeare sonnet, and the whole atmosphere just immediately changes. And she brings so much, don't even know what to say. She brings so much dignity to this. And I have the feeling Jessica Tandy could do the same, that she could be very funny and entertaining, and from one moment to the next, she can completely change the mood of what she's doing simply by the way she can use her talent. And I have to say, yeah, I mean, we can probably talk just about Driving Miss Daisy for hours and the problems of the movie and the oversimplifying of many things and how it is a feel-good movie for white people. And yeah, there's definitely a lot wrong with it. I would say if we leave everything out of the way, I would say it's charming, it's funny, it has its moments. And I would say that Jessica Tandy is, in my opinion, I know this is again rather unpopular, but I would say she's quite fantastic in it, actually. I think she does a lot with this. She doesn't turn it into the sweet little old lady role. There's a lot of character work here. She plays it not too broad as a comedy. She neither plays it too straightforward as a drama. There is a very nice balance. Her chemistry with Morgan Freeman is excellent. I like that she got this part because you're not very familiar with Jessica Tandy. I don't think that Bette Davis or Katharine Hepburn would have worked in this part. I'm sure that both of them would have given it too much spunk and energy. And Jessica Tandy is a very delicate presence, but still very forceful in what she is doing. I don't know excited to see what you are thinking about her.
Well, I am not a fan of the movie, obviously. That's just getting that out of the way. I do think it's aged poorly, and I think
don't
almost everything it's trying to say, whether it's about unlikely friendship or racism or like a snapshot of changing times in America, I think it fails to effectively put forth a strong enough perspective. Every time it feels like we're gonna dig into something about like her privilege or their shared feelings of discrimination or even the relationship itself, it's like we brush up against it and then we flash forward 5 years and we move on. So unfortunately, I just don't get a lot out of this movie, and I think Jessica Tandy is decent in this role, but I have to be honest, when I'm reading about like Bruce Beresford being insistent on casting her here and thinking she was perfect for it, I'm like, yeah, sure, on the surface level, she can play this cranky elderly woman role well, but I really don't get very much beyond that. And I'm eager to see you maybe explore why you think that she does give more than that, because I think it's a difficult role to dig into and give nuance, and she does have moments of that scattered throughout the film, but I ultimately leave this feeling underwhelmed by her work. And I think a lot of the problem is in the script. I don't find it convincing at all that Hoke would be so ingratiating of Daisy for so long when all she does 90% of the time is snap at him. Why does he feel this obligation to her? I just don't feel like any of that is explored. And then when she does start to soften over time, I'm just not seeing why she's softening, why she's less angry towards him, other than just the general passage of time, I guess. But I feel like we barely get any true bonding scenes between the two of them. And by the time I get to the end and they're like reuniting at the nursing home and it's this nice moment, I don't feel a sense of hope or tear up in this very, emotional way. I actually feel sad in seeing this dynamic where he has given so much to her and goes above and beyond to make her comfortable, and she barely had a kind word to say about him for 25 years until the end, when she recognizes, oh, you were my best friend after all. And it's like, great, glad you finally realized that. But like, the build up to that just doesn't make that climactic moment feel earned. And for me, what Jessica Tandy does is show someone who didn't change all that much over the course of her life, and she's consistent in that way, which I think is a strength of her performance, to be clear. But I don't see a lot of layers, and I don't find her as charming as the film wants me to find her. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, totally valid. The movie is definitely not the best, and it definitely has aged poorly. And writing is probably also not the strongest. But I feel that Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman really dig into these parts. And even if the writing lets them down, I feel that by sheer presence and the way they interact with each other, they achieve this kind of friendship. And I don't know, I like it that the change is not too drastic. For example, when they are cooking food together later, and then she is sitting at her table and he is sitting in the kitchen, you would expect them to now share the table, which would probably be nice if they did it. But at the same time, it makes sense that they still don't, that there is this kind of very routine that they have, and it changes very slowly, but not very drastically. But I sense that everything you do get out of this, all the kind of positive things about this relationship come purely from their respective performances. And Jessica Tandy, for me, is just such a great screen presence that I have the feeling just by being there, she, for me, is someone who offers you a whole life story. And I think this really depends on how you react to Jessica Tandy. And I can easily see you seeing her just as this cranky old woman who is mostly bitchy, who's not very charming or likable. But I always think that she walks a very difficult balance between unlikable and too charming. And I like it that she does neither of this. So she's not this sweet little old lady, but she's also not so cranky that you don't want to spend any time with her. She has, for me, I think, a great sense of humor that she can use in her performances. And I can understand why people would be kind of drawn to her, even if she is very cranky, because it never seems to come in bad face. But she seems to be the kind of person you can have a great relationship with once you get to know her a little bit more. And she is very set in her ways. She is very, no, I don't want to go in the car. I don't want to have a chauffeur. And since we talked about Fabulous Baker Boys and Michelle Pfeiffer so often talking about cats, let's have a quick shout out moment to Jessica Tandy saying, I will take a streetcar to go to the library.
Pointing at the screen moment.
Yeah. And I don't know, personally for me, she has very good dramatic scenes. The ending, I think this is, again, yes, you can sense why should you be invested in this relationship in so much that 25 years later, you sense this is a moving moment. And I'm not even sure if I consider it a moving moment, but I do think that Jessica Tandy is just so inhabiting this role from the difficult sides, from the more approachable sides, that for me, at the end of the movie, she has told a very big story just about this woman. And I don't know, it is difficult to describe a little bit for me, because while watching this movie, I realized she does not really have a lot of really big scenes. So she has, of course, the ending scenes, but a lot of it is really just being cranky and sitting in the back of the car and being disapproving. And I mean, a lot of the things I complain about Michelle Pfeiffer, I could also complain about Jessica Tandy here, that I wish she had more to do. And that's totally valid. But I don't know why, but I just get a lot out of this performance, simply from the way Jessica Tandy approaches this role and fulfills a very stereotypical, probably two-dimensional role, at least for me, with a lot of depth and dimension.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see how two people can react very differently to a performance. I will just say that, because I know it just sounds like such a surface level reading from my perspective, but I do just really struggle to see beyond her bitterness that she expresses so much, and that ornery quality that she has throughout a vast majority of the film. And I don't really think that she has enough of a compelling screen presence for me to look beyond that, if I'm being very bluntly honest about it. So, I mean, I would love to see what you see in it, quite honestly, because I do see in moments that there is a moving kind of like dignity in what she's bringing to this role and is not hamming it up, which I do appreciate. That even if she is like, you know, making these snappy comments to Morgan Freeman's character a lot, it doesn't feel like she's just like seeing this as this big theatrical opportunity to really ham it up on the big screen. She seems to understand who Daisy is. I'm just not really seeing it in the work personally. So it's a struggle. So just to get to a few scenes that I do think are worthy, I think as it goes along, she does start to reveal some layers that made her this way. Like after she goes to her temple and like he picks her up out in front where everyone can see that she has a black chauffeur. It's interesting how she plays that anger that she has towards him, because she can't say that she's embarrassed because like what will her friends think of her being driven by a black man. So she kind of stutters a bit and is like, oh well, people will think I'm rich. And I do think she gets into the nuance of that. And also when he says, well, you are rich, and she kind of protests to that, she refuses to even admit that she is rich because it's boastful. And also because it's sort of suggested that she doesn't want to be stereotyped as a Jewish woman. So I think she plays that discomfort well, especially in the kind of grimaces that she makes and the facial reactions she has in certain moments where she is kind of on the defense. Because I feel like so much of the film is her just lobbying all these things at Morgan Freeman's character, whereas I do like the moments where he gives it back to her a little bit and she has to kind of react in her own way to it.
No, definitely. What I like about Jessica Tandy is that she has this maybe Katharine Hepburn-like quality or Glenda Jackson-like quality. I know you're not a big fan of A Touch of Class, but
Yeah.
I like that I think these are actresses who can very easily switch between drama and comedy simply by changing the sound of their voice. They can be very sarcastic but can very easily switch from serious to humorous. And for me, Jessica Tandy also fits into this category. And I like that she plays the movie neither as a comedy nor as a drama, but she adds a lot of humorous moments. I like it when she is with Morgan Freeman on the cemetery, and she says, I taught some of the stupidest children God ever put on the face of the earth. And she says this was just the right amount of humor, but without making it obvious that Daisy herself wants to make a joke. So everything that is funny about this performance is just Jessica Tandy playing it funny without Daisy intending it to be funny. And at the same time, she never makes her the butt of the jokes. And I think this could have very easily happened because so many characters are constantly talking about her and are constantly kind of laughing about her behind her back because, oh, she's Miss Daisy, she's a little bit cranky and crazy and she's a little bit difficult. And in a way, she fulfills these stereotypes, but she doesn't give in to them. And she kind of defies your expectations of who the character is. And yeah, as you say, the back and forth between her and Morgan Freeman works very well. And I like how she has this kind of a certain kind of interest in him as a person without overdoing it. For example, when they are on the road and he tells her, oh, this is the first time I ever left the state of Georgia. And I could see an actress either being like, oh, wow, and totally overdoing her reaction. I could see an actress being like, maybe being too subtle and not really registering it, but she's just slightly amused and is like, oh, come on. And I don't know, I just very much enjoy this quietness of her performance. And the scene when they are having this break and she tells Hook about the first time she ever saw the ocean. This is for me this kind of Judi Dench moment where she can very so effortlessly change the tone of a moment. And for me, this is a little bit movie magic when she talks about this.
Yeah, I think that is her best scene in the film when she's like talking about remembering tasting the salt water in the lake. It's similar to Geraldine Page in A Trip to Bountiful, where you see on her face how she just transports back to that time and place when she was happier. But then, of course, she kind of catches herself before she indulges too much, and it's just like snaps back to reality. I think that's a really good moment for her. Similar to when he has to go stop and pee because he has to go when they're driving and it's nighttime, and he goes off and leaves her in the car very briefly, and she is like visibly scared to be alone and vulnerable. But again, it's like she snaps back when he finally returns and is like, oh, I wasn't scared. I'm okay. And in that kind of way, I think those moments when she kind of is like losing herself a little bit of that sort of cranky energy that she's had for so long, and is expressing some vulnerability there, and then realizing she can't go too far with it, I think is the sweet spot, I think, of some of the best parts of her performance that I'm not overall a fan of, but she does have some really nice moments like that, to her credit.
Yeah, it is a performance that consists of very, I think probably mostly of very small moments just connected together. But I feel that at the end, there something very extraordinary whole became out of it. If we want to go back to Isabelle Adjani, I feel Jessica Tandy took a lot of clay, little portions of clay, and she made something very beautiful with it.
Wow.
If I can say it like this. I don't know.
What a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah, it just shows how acting is so subjective and everybody reacts differently. And again, I'm not the biggest fan of the movie itself. I totally agree with you on its flaws, but I do praise the work by Morgan Freeman and Jessica Tandy.
Yeah, I do think another interesting scene is when she goes to the dinner where Martin Luther King is speaking. I think that's actually the most interesting scene in the film, because it gets into the sort of thorny nature of this relationship and the way that she sort of navigates that, the way she gets around inviting him in like a passive way without her heart really in it, and talking about how, hey, things are changing and things have changed. And then him being like, no, they haven't changed all that much, and that very small guilt that registers on her face when she's in the room and she's alone. I think that's also really well done, and more of that kind of subtlety that you've been talking about in terms of, having an impact, this performance. And then going to the 70s, and she's like experiencing these signs of dementia. She has her hair down and she's totally mixed up and thinking she's a school teacher again. That does feel sadly realistic, I think, in terms of someone who's been through that, because I've had relatives go through similar situations like that total confusion and the disorientation, and him being able to snap her out of it. And yeah, that's when she says like he's the best friend that she's had, which is probably true, to be clear. And it's a nice enough moment, but again, just doesn't really land as well for me as effectively as the filmmakers are maybe hoping it, because I ultimately just don't find their dynamic to be very charming at all. But that's my own thing. So I think it's a movie it's a performance that is made up of good small moments that ultimately don't add up to a super compelling character in the end necessarily. So that's why I struggle a little bit with this win personally.
Yeah. No, I get what you say. I mean, the moment, this "You're My Friend" moment can be touching. At the same time, it is a little bit Sandra Bullock and her mate in Crash.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. Yes.
It has this kind of dynamic. And and I agree with the Martin Luther King scene that you mentioned. And a better movie and a better script would probably from there on developed more into their relationship, because this is a kind of a moment where this is kind of a decisive moment where he is really like, yeah, don't invite me last minute to this, and don't tell me about this 1 minute before it starts, and don't treat me like this. But of course, instead of this, we immediately come to the dimension part, and everything is forgotten.
Jump another 5 years. Right. Yeah.
So the better movie would have given more attention to this. And I think if I would just read the script of Driving Miss Daisy, I would probably say, oh God, what is this? And again, I really can only come back to, this is only working because of the actors.
Okay, well, I think it's time to get into why Jessica Tandy was our winner from this lineup. So let's get to the Oscars. Before the Oscars, Michelle Pfeiffer was the critics' favorite. She did a clean sweep of the major critics awards: New York, Los Angeles, National Society of Film Critics, National Board of Review. Plus, she won the Golden Globe for drama, so she had a lot of heat going into this. Meanwhile, Jessica Tandy won the Golden Globe for comedy and the Boston Film Critics Award. Pauline Collins was a Golden Globe nominee, and she won at BAFTA, but she won over 3 actresses who were nominated for the Oscars the previous year. So, what does that actually mean? Not too much, maybe. And Isabelle Adjani didn't have any American precursors, but she did, of course, win the César Award. And Jessica Lange was a Golden Globe nominee and didn't really have too much heat otherwise. But from my readings, Jessica Tandy was thought to have this win in the bag. Like, none of the other nominees even thought they had a chance, even with all of Michelle Pfeiffer's critical support. So, as we know, industry is not critics, so there can be a disconnect there. But why do we think Jessica Tandy was our winner here?
Well, obviously, I mean, the easy answer is kind of the old veteran who the Academy feels like has to honor. But personally, I think that's a big injustice to Jessica Tandy. So I also did some reading. And so for Michelle Pfeiffer, I did read a lot of reviews for her performance that were very, as you, I think, already mentioned, oh, people probably won't think that a woman who looks like this can also act, or she finally shows that she can act, and she finally shows that she is capable of more. And also from other articles, I had a feeling that people were not like, oh, she swept the whole award season, she is a favorite, but it was more like, why is she sweeping the whole award season?
Yeah.
Was more like the feeling I got. And from Jessica Tandy, basically every review I wrote of her performance was like, okay, this will be an Oscar contender. Some writing, okay, you can hand her the Oscar right now. I think it was a pretty big deal that she was cast in this. So I read some articles that basically were like, okay, this is our version of The Search for Scarlett O'Hara, who will play Miss Daisy, because so many big actresses from the past were mentioned here, and there was a lot of talk about how she didn't get to do the Streetcar movie. And yeah, and from everything I read, everyone predicted Jessica Tandy to win this. But again, it's kind of interesting, not based on just sentimentality or that she needs to have an Oscar, but people back then really said, okay, she deserves to win this, and she will win this because she is the most deserving. This was the general tone that I found in most coverage at the time. People really liked this performance and thought she deserved to win.
Yeah, it's true. And same from what I read as well. Obviously, Driving Miss Daisy is the film that they loved the most of this bunch. It's the only Best Picture nominee, let alone it being the winner. And I think that despite Daisy being such a stubborn kind of character, it makes sense that the Academy would feel more aligned with a woman of a certain age who's confronting her own prejudice and confronting aging. And I think there was a sort of little engine that could sort of campaign for the movie, in the sense that it wasn't a safe bet at all, and that the producers really struggled to sell this to studios. And then it became a hit. And this was at a time when films for older folks centering characters in their 70s and 80s were disappearing or going to TV movies. And this proved that there were still stories to be told that centered the experience of older generations. So I do think there was a little bit of a rooting factor there in wanting Driving Miss Daisy, and by proxy Jessica Tandy, to succeed and to prove a point. And I was also looking at how, for example, Michelle Pfeiffer was covered as far as her own sort of candidacy here. And like you're kind of mentioning, a lot of the columnists thought that critics were voting for her because they thought she was hot. So she was kind of dismissed in that way, which really frustrated her. So yeah, but I think that could contribute to why, by comparison, Jessica Tandy was just considered the more serious and respectable option between the two of them, if this was indeed just probably a race between the two of them, realistically.
Yeah, probably was. I mean, yeah, I can understand Michelle Pfeiffer's frustration. I mean, when you get so much acclaim and hardware and critics awards for a performance, and then you still have to defend yourself and basically say, when everybody says, oh, you're just hot.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, we often have this old veteran versus the next big star kind of narrative at the Oscars. And I would say probably in most cases, the hot new star wins. I mean, you can go back to Katharine Hepburn in Morning Glory, or Julie Holliday, Grace Kelly, Jennifer Lawrence. There are so many cases. I think Jessica Tandy, I don't know if Jessica Tandy might maybe have had more difficulty if Driving Miss Daisy had not also been this big financial success. And of course, the Best Picture winner, because how many times does it happen that a movie about an old woman wins Best Picture? So this clearly was in her favor. Why this time the Academy picked the veteran instead of the newcomer.
Yeah, and even if she is a veteran, I feel like she has the kind of narrative of kind of a newcomer, if that makes sense. Because it's like, obviously she's been acting for 60 years by this point, but her kind of narrative of coming back to film and leading in this way, I think was kind of like a fresh sort of narrative.
Yeah, and probably at the end, Michelle Pfeiffer probably also had a disadvantage with the fact that hers, while a very acclaimed performance, is also not the kind of performance that probably usually wins an Oscar. So it's not a typical Oscar role in a way, I would say.
Yeah.
So compared to a more traditional work like Jessica Tandy.
Yeah. The Michelle Pfeiffer performance and role feels like the kind of thing that people think will net someone an Oscar, but 9 times out of 10 doesn't actually end up winning.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. In most cases, there is just something more traditional and more that the Academy responds to. And to be honest, even with Michelle Pfeiffer's award sweep, I would say that Jessica Tandy probably had a pretty easy win here.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Probably, I don't know, just to look at the 80s, maybe one of the bigger blowouts in terms of a winner. So, yeah, and she got a nice standing ovation, which I'm sure was such an incredible moment for her to get that recognition from her film peers. At least she obviously had plenty of respect from her stage peers, but I'm happy that she did get that moment ultimately, even if I don't think that she's necessarily the best in the lineup. I think it's definitely in line with Geraldine Page and Katharine Hepburn in terms of that kind of winner of the 80s that they just gravitated to.
I mean, yeah, I'm just a fan of old lady roles, but just Geraldine Page is also very much my kind of performance.
Yeah. And I think Geraldine Page is much better than Jessica Tandy personally, and at least gets more to do than Jessica Tandy in terms of range. But anyway, shall we get to our Twitter questions?
Yes, let's.
We're not going to have any from Fritz because he's here answering them.
Yeah, I had so many ideas.
Okay, let's start with Dark Shaka, who asked, if Tandy had reprised and won the 1951 Best Actress Oscar for A Streetcar Named Desire, what would have been the consequences for this particular Oscar race?
Difficult to say. It probably depends on if Jessica Tandy would have had a movie career after winning an Oscar for A Streetcar Named Desire. But to be honest, I could see her win here again, just because there's this nice narrative that it's been almost 40 years since she won, and she had this great stage role in her not in her youth, but in her 40s. But okay, that's still her youth. And she had now she gets this great role. To be honest, I could see win her again here.
Yeah, I think she still could have won this one. I think if she's in Streetcar and she wins, she could have had an even stronger film career and really confirmed her as like a true film veteran in addition to a stage veteran. So I don't think maybe even that much changes, honestly. Greg Creven said, if Bette Davis had been in better health in 1989 and was able to do Driving Miss Daisy, do you think she would have won?
If there would be a more traditional Oscar alternative, it would be easier to say no, but at the same time, I mean, I'm not sure how Bette Davis would have been in this role. I mean, this was very much at the end of her life. She already had her strokes by this point. So I'm not sure how good her performance actually would have been. I'm gonna say she wouldn't have won.
I think she would have. Like, if she was in better health, like if she was up to the task in 1989, I think even if it's not to my taste, I think it's a very Beatty kind of part, and like we've been saying, a very traditional Oscar-winning kind of part. So I think, for lack of an alternative, yes. Matt Stillman said, Michelle Pfeiffer famously starred in Grease 2. What unmade sequel to a successful musical would you like to have seen Jessica Tandy in?
Wait, I had an answer for this. It's not a funny answer, but I just thought it might work. So she could make a musical based on the later parts of Anna Leon Owen's life. So from The King and I, after she, I didn't read her whole Wikipedia page. I just read that she went to America at some point, and she also got to be pretty old. So maybe they could make a musical out of that one.
Yeah, why not?
Like after The King and I.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of musicals that I think really need sequels. I'm just gonna make that general statement, but let's see her in The Sound of Music 2. Following the Von Trapps in the 50s or whatever, into the 60s and 70s. No idea what role she would play, but that would be interesting.
Definitely.
David Pusak said, outside of A Streetcar Named Desire, what Best Actress winning / nominated roles could you see Jessica Tandy doing?
So I went by her age at the time.
Okay.
I could see her in something like Gaslight or The Heiress.
I had The Heiress too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she could totally do that.
Yeah, and in general stuff that's based on a stage play, like Come Back Little Sheba or The Lion in Winter or Summertime. I could see her in just in these kinds of more stagey or quieter parts.
Yeah, I think so. Well, and also, I mean, the trip to Bountiful is right there, so I think
that's right.
It's possible. I don't know if she's a great fit for it, but seems like she would have been in the discussion for that at least.
Yeah.
Maybe on Golden Pond could have worked.
Yeah. The funny thing is, for some reason, I cannot see her in the trip to Bountiful. I don't know why, but maybe it could have worked, yeah.
E. Merman's Purse said, if Tandy doesn't win this one, does she later win supporting for Fried Green Tomatoes?
It's also so very difficult because Mercedes Ruehl was pretty popular win that year, and I mean there are these kinds of wins where the Academy feels bad for not giving it to you, like I don't know, Judi Dench with Shakespeare in Love, but of course Shakespeare in Love also won Best Picture. But then there are cases where you're kind of a favorite and you don't win, and they don't care about you anymore. To be honest, I would think Mercedes Ruehl still wins.
Yeah, I haven't seen Fried Green Tomatoes in a long time, but I don't remember it being a role that felt like it was calling to win an Oscar. Sort of felt like an Afterglow nomination ultimately. So I would say no as well. This is a question we got from Instagram, actually, which was from Mark Guvara, who said, compare Isabelle Adjani's process here with the one she gave in The Story of Adele H. I'm not sure about process necessarily, but there are certainly a lot of similarities in that sort of just in the performance. The characters themselves, that sort of like single-minded obsession over a man is very similar. But this just feels like a much more mature and thoughtful version of that than Adele H.
Yeah, it's probably that Camille still has this artistic background that makes the role a little bit more complex, while Adele H is still also a great performance, but as you said, it's much more single-minded. But it's also great that in Camille Claudel there is a scene where everybody's shouting that Victor Hugo died. Makes a nice connection.
Yeah, so many connections this year.
Yes.
I'm a movie fan said, in a just world, Isabelle Adjani would take the prize. What do you think happened, besides Tandy being legendary, etc.?
Well, the foreign language barrier.
Yeah.
It's not...
I don't know if the film was seen enough. I don't know if it was watched as much as others here.
And I mean, to be honest, I think the fact that she got a nomination for it is already pretty miraculous. Just because it's a foreign language performance. I mean, she did have one performance like 14 years ago, so it's not like she is really on the radar of Academy members. So I would say this is more like the nomination is the win kind of case.
I think so. I don't think it's a matter of Isabelle not being good enough so much as Jessica Tandy just had a very powerful combination of factors that led to her win.
Yeah.
Also, our friend Joey Gentili said, Isabelle Adjani was a woman robbed, easily the strongest in this lineup. With that said, this is her second and latest nomination. She also gave a superb performance in '94's Queen Margot. Why do you think she missed there in such a weak year for lead actress?
So it's been ages since I saw Queen Margot, so it's hard for me to comment. I know that another actress from the movie won in Cannes, and I know that
Yeah,
Isabelle
Verna
Adjani,
Lisi.
yeah, and I know that Isabelle Adjani won a César, but I didn't, looking on the IMDb page, she wasn't nominated for anything else. So I just assumed that she wasn't, even if 1994 was a very weak year for Best Actress, that she wasn't just on the radar.
Yeah. So we actually just talked about Queen Margot on a recent episode of How Did They Win? Because the topic was 1994 Best Costume Design, and that was the only nomination for Queen Margot. But yeah, she's great in that film. Very, again, stormy and unpredictable as she is in Camille Claudel. I think, like you kind of mentioned, most of the buzz from that film was with Verna Lisi more than Isabelle. Maybe they felt that Isabelle had kind of done a performance like that before, so weren't as taken with it. I don't know. I could be making up a narrative of people being bored of Isabelle Adjani that didn't actually exist. But again, it's like a similar kind of character. Christoph said, Isabelle Adjani and this year's Best Actor winner, Daniel Day-Lewis, have been a couple since 1989, but they arrived at the ceremony separately. Daniel Day-Lewis with another woman, did not sit next to each other, and Daniel Day-Lewis did not mention her in his speech. Huh? That's his words. Huh? Yeah. And if huh doesn't count as a question, although it totally is one, replace it with why. And who is the mystery woman who was Daniel Day-Lewis's Oscar date?
He had actually asked me this before, so like a couple of weeks ago already, because he noticed it. And I also did some research. I have no idea. I know there is a woman that when Daniel Day-Lewis, she's sitting next to him, and when he wins, she gets a close-up. So I suppose she's there with him, but you don't see her on any red carpet pictures. So there's no description of her, and there are also no red carpet pictures of Daniel Day-Lewis and Isabelle Adjani together. So I have no idea what's happening there.
I'm not sure at all. It was pretty early in their relationship from what I understand, so maybe it was like we're not fully official kind of thing yet between the two of them, but yeah, I have no idea who that mystery woman is. Ben Roberts said, rank these actresses nominated for their performances in foreign language films. Isabelle Adjani in Camille Claudel, Sophia Loren in Two Women, Liv Ullmann in The Emigrants, Ingrid Bergman in Autumn Sonata, and Marie-Christine Barrault in Kazan Cuisine.
So I have Ingrid Bergman at number 1, Sophia Loren at number 2, Isabelle Adjani at number 3, Liv Ullmann at number 4, and Marie-Christine Barrault at number 5.
Well, guess what? We have the exact same ranking.
We have
to a
taste.
T.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The exact same ranking. Still do not understand that Kazan Cuisine nomination. Anyway, let's move on to another one from Christoph, who said, Shirley Valentine was a Tony-winning one-woman Broadway production, and I assume it was a wonderful evening out. Why did they have to adapt it to the screen and make it so awkward? And why did they have to cast Albert Einstein as a Greek waiter?
I mean, totally agree, and I think we already talked about how the movie adaptation is really not that hot. Yeah. I mean, I don't see what they probably had to open it up. I don't think the movie would work if it was just her.
Yeah.
But they probably could have opened it up better. So they didn't need to make every other character in this movie so awful.
And yeah, Tom Conti has been many faces over the course of his career. A Greek waiter, Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer, just the range that man has. But yeah, it's an interesting choice to adapt a one-woman show to film because of how inherently stagey it sounds like Shirley Valentine was. I don't know if it's like awkward necessarily, but it is not great ultimately. So Joey Gentili said, Pauline Collins is so delightful here in Shirley Valentine and bookends the decade with Goldie Hawn as a comedy nomination. Which nom between the two do you find the better comedy performance?
Personally, Goldie Hawn, because it feels more like a comedy performance.
There you go. Definitely Goldie Hawn for me, and it's not particularly close. All due respect to Pauline Collins. Miles McHale said, "Is Pauline Collins our first Best Actress nominee to fully break the fourth wall?"
I don't know. Does Julie Andrews break the fourth wall in Mary Poppins?
I do think maybe she does. So
I have no idea.
I mean, there's plenty of like musical performances like that have directly looked into the camera. Even Julie Andrews in Victor Victoria does that too.
I'm not sure if anybody ever really talks into the camera, but
right. That's why it's a little different.
This might be her.
So yeah, my first thought for some reason was Diary of a Mad Housewife, but I didn't remember her actually looking into the camera. So
no.
She might be the first. I don't know.
I mean, she looks kind of into the camera at the very end in the final scene, but she's not like talking or making aware that she knows that there's an audience.
Yeah. Anyway, Ben Roberts said to rank the following actresses who were all nominated or won for reprising Tony-winning roles on screen: Pauline Collins in Shirley Valentine, Anne Bancroft in The Miracle Worker, Shirley Booth in Come Back Little Sheba, Viola Davis in Fences.
So my ranking is Anne Bancroft, then Shirley Booth, then Viola Davis, then Pauline Collins.
Wow. Okay. Well, mine is different, but we have the same last place. I would do number 1, Shirley Booth. Huge fan of that performance. Number 2, Viola Davis. Number 3, Anne Bancroft. And 4, Pauline Collins.
But we agree on
the first 3 are fantastic.
Yeah,
so
definitely
interchangeable for me. Japes said, "I think Music Box is one of Lange's best films. How come nobody talks about this film anymore, even among Oscar fans? And if she had not won before for Tootsie, would she have been a stronger contender this year?"
I would say, I mean, apart from Frances and Tootsie, I would say most the other Jessica Lange Oscar movies from the 80s are not really talked about. So this probably just comes from the fact that she is always the only nominee for them. And they didn't really make an impact otherwise. And Music Box is also not that great, so from my point of view. So
yeah.
If she had been a bigger contender, it's hard to say. If she hadn't won for Tootsie, could she have won for Country as a kind of payback?
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, if she hadn't won by that point, I don't think that she would have won for Music Box.
Maybe she would have had a slight overdue narrative, but I don't see this being the one that would put her over the top. As far as why no one talks about it, I think it's hard to find on top of everything else. At least in America, it's literally not streaming anywhere on any official service. So it's just like not even widely available. And so, yeah, I don't think it's particularly great either. So, yeah. Amar said, "Why Jessica Lange always ended up as a lone nominee for her films in these weak-ass years. Can her last 4 noms be considered a filler because the voters go, oh, thank God, Jessica Lange. At least we can nominate someone we know and feel better about this category."
I mean, if we're being honest, that's the same with Meryl Streep. So
yeah.
I mean, yes, there are some actresses who are on the Academy's radar for a certain amount of time. And I mean, Music Box did have kind of prestigious people involved with it, apart from Jessica Lange. I mean, none of them were nominated, but she was still very much praised for her performance. And yeah, I mean, Blue Sky, yeah, weak years. I mean, yes, yes, Blue Sky is an interesting movie and interesting performance. Probably wouldn't have won in a stronger year, but yeah, she definitely benefited from this being weak years. But I would say Pauline Collins also benefited from it being a weak year, and Isabelle Adjani also benefited from it being a weak year. You have no idea if there had been, I don't know, if Meryl Streep had a very showy role, or if Jodie Foster had followed up The Accused with something very showy, they might have easily been included here. So, I mean, everyone who is nominated benefits from this.
Yes. Well, I do think there are showy roles that were not nominated, which we will get to later in some of the snub questions. But yeah, I think she's pretty good overall in all of them, even if she does kind of feel like filler at the end of the day for some of these. It's not like she's putting in mediocre work. at all, but I do think she was definitely becoming a old reliable by this point, especially. Chauncey Tellez said, did Michelle Pfeiffer finish in second, and how is the world different if she won? Well, I won't reveal that yet. As we know, the format of our show, we reveal that last. But how is the world different if she won? I don't know if things are all that different. I think her career is generally the same, but what do you think?
I mean, I would think so too. She got still pretty.
Yeah.
She was still busy in the 90s, and I actually have no idea how old Michelle Pfeiffer is now, but it's not like roles for women her age are written. Great roles for women her age are written every day. So I doubt her career would be any different, to be honest.
Andy Bayless said, Michelle Pfeiffer is an actress that feels like she should have an Oscar, but doesn't feel like she might ever get one at this point. I hope I'm wrong. Would you have given her any more nominations or a win in any other year? Certainly replace her Love Field nomination with Batman Returns, I'll say that.
Yes.
I think even like French Exit from a few years ago was nomination worthy. I really like her in Mother. Hairspray, why not? Just throw her as a contender in there. But the one I definitely think she should have gotten in for is The Age of Innocence in 1983.
Cannot disagree with anything you said. You can maybe make a question mark to Scarface. I really don't remember don't remember anything of that, but I know that she is good. And then there's Married to the Mob. I mean, I don't know, if Melanie Griffiths gets nominated for Working Girl, then no, why not Michelle Pfeiffer?
There you go. Bruno said, at the time, Michelle won the Golden Globe for lead actress in a drama and swept the major critics prizes. Was the sentimentality of Jessica Tandy being a legacy actress the only reason Michelle lost?
Well, I think we kind of touched on that. Personally, I would say no. People really admired her performance. She had the benefit of being in the biggest movie of the 5 nominees. I mean, I guess her movie had more nominations than the other 4 combined. I know the Fabulous Baker Boys had a couple, but Driving Miss Daisy still did very well. And and as we said, it's not like this award sweep was seen as, wow, this is Michelle Pfeiffer, but rather as, oh, what is going on? Why? And are people only voting for her because she is hot, which is, of course, terrible, but yeah, that's how things are.
Dark Shaka said, in the Brazilian translation, Pfeiffer's movie was titled Susie and the Baker Boys. Do you think that making her the titular role in the original movie name would have helped her chances of winning? Probably not.
Yeah.
Quite frankly.
No, I mean, it would have been a nice touch, but I mean, if we go by this, then Pauline Collins probably, or Isabelle Adjani probably should have won.
There you go. They were the titular roles, and look how far that got them.
Yeah.
So, Rob Montoya said, Michelle Pfeiffer won the Globe and swept the 4 major critics awards. Why didn't the babe factor work for her? Well, ironically, the babe factor worked against her, as we've said.
Yeah.
So, the only other thing I can think of is that The Fabulous Baker Boys is just more about the brothers than her. But also, I mean, like, Driving Miss Daisy was more of a warm and rousing kind of film than The Fabulous Baker Boys, which is pretty downbeat on the whole.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this happens in a lot of cases, that the veteran stars in more downbeat movies or in smaller movies than the newcomer. And in this case, it was the other way around, that the veteran had the big picture behind her.
Yeah. Japes asked, which performance best represents Pfeiffer as an actress? Catwoman or Susie Diamond?
I don't know what presents her better as an actress, but I will always love her Selina Kyle. Now, this will always be one of my very big favorites.
Yeah, I mean, culturally speaking, in the general pop culture sense, obviously Catwoman will be what the general public identifies with her the most and represents her, quote unquote. Even if maybe, Susie Diamond, this movie, may give her slightly more to do. Celluloid Siren said, who would you like to see wear a red dress on top of a piano singing Makin' Whoopee from today's actresses? And wouldn't Margot Robbie do an almost identical job at it, visually at least?
I mean, Margot Robbie would work. I need to think about this for a moment. Why don't you say who you want to see in a red dress?
Well, Margot Robbie certainly fits that mold, but I have another one that I will save for when we get to a recasting question later on. So
Yeah, right.
stay tuned.
Right, we have this recasting question. Yeah, then I will wait for that one too.
Miles McHale asked, Michelle should have won, in my opinion. Was this a Sigourney or early Winona style, she's got so many noms ahead of her situation?
Well, I definitely assume that many Academy members thought, okay, Michelle Pfeiffer's time will come.
Yeah. And then it never came.
Yes.
Although there's still time, to be clear. But
yes,
it's been a while.
Fingers crossed. I mean, it's getting hard to hope for Michelle. You have to hope for Michelle Pfeiffer. You have to hope for Glenn Close. You have to hope for Sigourney Weaver, for Ned Benning. We're running out of time, people. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty likely, honestly, a classic Oscar scenario of being like, well, maybe not this year, but we will get to her eventually. And then here we are 30 years later, and it eventually never came. Here's a very specific question from Joey Gentili,
of course,
who asked, which role would Louise Reiner play best had she had these 5 to choose from, and age is not an issue? I'll let you take the floor on this one.
I thought obviously the first easy answer would be Driving Miss Daisy. I could definitely see her in this one. But then I thought, if age is not an issue and we rewrite the part a little bit, why not Shirley Valentine?
That would be really fun.
Yeah, of course, we have to rewrite it a little bit. So I don't think that Louise Reiner could do a British, or I don't know where Shirley is from which part of Britain. Don't think that she could do this. Liverpool. Okay, I don't think that she could do an accent like this, but rewrite her as a German woman and change the background a little bit. I can see her in it.
That's a very, very good take. I mean, I would also say like Music Box could be something that could be very compelling from her. But yeah, that I like your answer of Shirley Valentine. Here's another one from Christoph. Which old lady winning role from the 80s would have been the best Louise Reiner comeback vehicle? None is not an option.
Loving the Louise Reiner love here. Wonder where that came from.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say Driving Miss Daisy from the 3.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would say my second would be On Golden Pond. I think that would be really charming work from her, but yeah. Would be fascinated to see what she could have done with Driving Miss Daisy and win a 3rd Oscar. Imagine that.
That would have been a moment.
Yeah. Glorfindel of Gondolin said, this contest for me was between the sentimental favorite Tandy versus the sexy ingenue Pfeiffer. Historically speaking, does the Academy prefer safe, sentimental performances over exciting, star-making roles? They are often criticized for this perceived preference.
I mean, the Academy does honor star-making roles. But I would say if the star-making role, again, fits into their narrative. So, for example, when somebody like Grace Kelly puts on glasses and acts against type. I mean, we do have like Julia Roberts, of course. This is this big star performance. I don't think in general that they prefer the sentimental choice. I would say, or maybe it changed over time. So when people like, I think in the 90s, when people like Lauren Bacall and Gloria Stewart lost Oscars, I think you began to realize that this changed. And then, of course, Emmanuel Riva would have been deserving, but it would have probably a lot of people still would have considered it a sentimental choice just because she is old. Because, you know, when an actress is old, it's always a sentimental choice. And I don't think that they prefer it all the time. So I do think star-making performances are also still very much in their wheelhouse.
Yeah, it certainly is interesting how people on the internet talk about older contenders contending for Oscars. That's a discussion for another time. But, you know, safe, sentimental performances, I think, are easier for voters to nominate, definitely. But I think every year is different. You know, I mean, like, this is a decade that had Geraldine Page win one year and then Marlee Matlin won the very next year. So it's like every year is different. Elijah said, did Pfeiffer's affair with John Malkovich during filming of Dangerous Liaisons hurt her Oscar chances? Probably not. I don't think that was a factor in anyone's mind.
I have to be honest, I actually never heard of that they had an affair. And I also doubt that it would hurt her Oscar chances.
Okay, here we go. Rob Montoya said, fast forward to 2023 and recast all 5 of these performances. Did you do that ahead of time?
Let me just quickly check. So okay. So for Camille Claudel, Yeah, sounds rather very easy answer, but I have Marion Cotillard just because I feel that she is also a similar actress who can go very big and can very immerse herself into a character like this.
Yep.
For Music Box, I have no idea why. I have Keira Knightley. I don't know.
Okay.
I would like to see her as a lawyer.
That would be fun. Yeah.
For Shirley Valentine, I have either Helena Bonham Carter or Olivia Colman.
I have Olivia Colman.
Yeah.
Yes.
For Driving Miss Daisy, I have Glenn Close.
Oh, come on. Well,
I think
whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes. Yeah, I think she could do it. I found the Fabulous Baker Boys the hardest to recast. For some reason, I don't know why. I thought as a follow-up to an Oscar nomination, it might be a nice project. I landed on Ana de Armas.
Okay. Yeah, I could definitely easily see that, her doing that. Yep. Yeah. Good combination there. What I came up with, I was going to mention that for Camille Claudel, Juliette Binoche has already played her, literally, but she may be too old for that now. Marion Cotillard was definitely a possibility. I also think Léa Seydoux feels like someone who could have done it. Olivia Colman for Shirley Valentine. For Music Box, I went with Jessica Chastain.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Which feels right in her wheelhouse. For the Fabulous Baker Boys, I decided to do someone a little younger, and I went with Zendaya.
Oh yeah, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I think that could be a similar kind of like big. It's the kind of thing where like Michelle Pfeiffer was kind of already a star before Fabulous Baker Boys, but this could kind of vault her even further into respect kind of movie star. And then for Driving Miss Daisy, I mean, Green Book is already here, so we don't need a remake. But I thought it would be fun to put in Barbara Streisand.
Oh.
I don't think she would do it at all, but I just want her back on the screen.
She probably wouldn't do it, but I would definitely pay for it.
Yes. Would love to see her bicker with her chauffeur. Okay, this is a wild question that I have no idea if you are prepared for, but let's go for it anyway. Nathan Bigley said, Taylor Swift was born on December 13th, 1989. Categorize each of these performances as a Taylor Swift era or album.
I have seen the question. I'm not prepared for it because I have to confess, I'm not a music guy, and I'm very sorry, I know zero about Taylor Swift.
Well, I know enough to make my way through this question a little bit, but I probably will not get a lot of this right because there's a lot of Swifties out there that may even be listening. So here goes nothing. I'm just gonna go for it. Dive head. I'm off the deep end. Watch as I dive in, to quote another music icon. Okay. Jessica Tandy is Taylor Swift, her self-titled debut, because it's the oldest and there's a nostalgia factor there, I guess, that people who do like it respond to. Pauline Collins, I would say, is Fearless, because she's, that's her second album. She's underestimated, but going out there and proving herself. I'm going to say Michelle Pfeiffer is Red, because she has the red dress. And she's also like, it's a little more romantic, but also like she's been through some shit by that point. I'm going to say Isabelle Adjani is Reputation, in the sense that like it's fun at first, but then it gets a lot darker over time. And then Jessica Lange, I'm going to put in Midnights, which is the most recent one, because it's like someone who's very like contemplative and lost in thought and trying to figure things out in life. So anyway, I had to do a stupid amount of research for that, so I hope people enjoyed.
As someone without any knowledge about this, it sounded very reasonable.
Thank you so much. I'm glad at least it sounded reasonable, even if it wasn't. Okay. Patrick Ross said, any thoughts on Spike Lee directing a remake of Driving Miss Daisy? Do you think Rosie Perez deserved a nomination for Do the Right Thing? Those are two separate questions. That would be very funny, first of all, if he did that, but it would be very different. Let me tell you that.
Would be very different, but it would be kind of interesting to see what he does with it.
Yeah, especially if it was like a parody of
Yeah.
of these kinds of movies.
I mean, I
Um,
cannot imagine that he would direct this script, so they would probably also need to
yeah.
do a lot of rewriting.
Oh yes. I think Rosie Perez in Do the Right Thing was probably supporting, but I also think like Ruby D might get priority over her in my estimation from Do the Right Thing.
Yeah, from how I
So
remember it, I would agree with you, but it's also been a while since
yeah.
I've seen it.
Both Chelsea and Luke Val asked whether we would nominate Sally Field for Steel Magnolias or Meg Ryan for When Harry Met Sally, and which we think was closer to a nomination.
I would assume that probably Sally Field was closer to a nomination simply because she is Sally Field and it's more traditional Oscar bait. I think make breaking into a leading acting category for a movie like When Harry Met Sally is more difficult. But
Yeah.
to be honest, yeah, I could replace them with I could drop Pauline Collins and Jessica Lange for them.
Yeah, I think I would do the same. And I think Sally Field was definitely closer, I would imagine. I think there were people even predicting that she would be nominated, so plus Julia Roberts did get into supporting, so yeah, definitely more in the Academy wheelhouse than When Harry Met Sally, perhaps. But yeah, both incredibly deserving. We got multiple other questions about it, so we'll talk about it even more. Andrew Carden said, considering their penchant for nominating Meryl for everything in this decade, do you think she was in serious contention, let's say among the top 10 vote getters for She Devil?
I'm not sure. I mean, top 10 could be possible, simply because I don't know who else was in how many other actresses were in contention. But from what I remember, I think these comedies, She Devil and Death Become Her, of course, both great, and we love them today. But I think at the time they were kind of seen as a step down for Meryl Streep and more like, oh,
Yeah.
look, this major dramatic actress has finally reached the end of her streak, and now she's doing a comedy with Roseanne. So not sure if she would have, not sure how that she don't think that she was very close for this.
Yeah, and it didn't get great reviews. She did get a Golden Globe nomination for it, but sometimes that doesn't really matter. I would imagine there were probably 5 that were ahead of her, like let's say Sally Field, Meg Ryan, Andy McDowell for Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Kathleen Turner in The War of the Roses. There was Liv Ullmann, who also got a Golden Globe nomination for The Rose Garden. I think Isabelle Huppert was on the radar for The Story of Women. So, yeah, I don't think she was in the top 10. John T. said 1989 had a lot of commercial fare options with big name ladies, Sally Field, Kathleen Turner, and Meg Ryan, but instead chose smaller films like Shirley Valentine, Music Box, and Camille Claudel. Why do you think that was, and which of the box office hits came closest?
I mean, it is a kind of a strange year for Best Actress. You have, I think there are 2 Drama Globe nominees, 2 comedy nominees, and Isabelle Adjani from a foreign language film. I just assume that maybe Steel Magnolia was not seen as serious enough. Maybe, I don't know. Could be that Sally Field was 6th. I mean, Shirley Valentine. I always forget if the movie is called Shirley Valentine or Pauline Collins, but Shirley Valentine. Shirley Valentine is, I mean, she won a Tony for this, so there was, she won it the same year, so she was on the radar of people at this time. Camille Claudel is a showy part, even if it's a foreign language film performance. So sometimes the Academy is willing to nominate something not in English. And yeah, Music Box, Jessica Lange just had a good streak at the time. And I suppose it's like little bit in 94 when we again have Jessica Lange. So the Academy just prefers to stay a little bit with when they don't know what to do, they prefer to stay with what they know.
Yep, they are conservative often in that way. Also, I don't really know how much this translated to voters necessarily, but I noticed when I was watching the ceremony, which I like to do now, just to watch the ceremony, get a feel for how things went about. There was a very big focus on the Oscars wanting to go international. Like they had satellite presentations throughout the ceremony from all these different countries. And it's possible that like some of that energy was also in the air with like voters wanting to be a little adventurous and be like, hey, we'll nominate Pauline Collins and Isabelle Adjani and like let's see what happens here. And it's not just the Hollywood stars and the big blockbusters that need attention. I don't know. I have no idea if that translates at all, but something was in the air perhaps with that.
Yeah.
Jeremy Kaplan said, my personal favorite, Andie MacDowell, either won or was nominated for every major precursor. Why do you think she missed out here to several performances in films that were smaller and had less impact than Sex, Lies, and Videotape?
Again, I would say because the performances themselves are more traditionally Oscar-friendly. So Shirley Valentine is probably not what you think about when you consider Oscars. But again, she won a Tony Award, she won an Olivier Award, so there was prestige connected to it. Isabelle Adjani is a prestigious actress, and Andie MacDowell, I don't know, was this her breakthrough, or did she do stuff before?
It was. Yep.
So probably too new.
Yeah, and I also think that film may have been a bit of a rough sit for some older Academy voters, perhaps.
That too, yeah.
It's a little too experimental indie, not really on the same wavelength as the traditional Academy kind of performance, although she is very good. So on that note, Antonio asked, do you think Andie MacDowell deserved to be nominated, and if yes, instead of who? Her run was very good. She won Critics Awards and got a Golden Globe nomination. Yes, I think so. For me, she doesn't quite reach Sally Field or Meg Ryan necessarily, who I think, Sally Field has this incredible, Oscar clip that holds up to this day. Meg Ryan, I think that is one of the absolute best romantic comedy performances there has ever been. But I think Andie MacDowell is really good in portraying this kind of like sexually repressed kind of woman who's sort of coming into her own, and looking back is probably her best performance. And so I would definitely replace Pauline Collins, Jessica Lange, and Jessica Tandy with Sally Field, Meg Ryan, and maybe Andie MacDowell. Although on a different day, I might nominate Winona Ryder and Heathers just for fun.
Yeah, I also liked Andie MacDowell. I mean, I now made room for Sally Field and Meg Ryan. I think Andie MacDowell doesn't make the cut here.
That's okay. Jimmy said, 1989 is essentially Kathleen Turner's last year as a leading lady star. If any of her films in the 80s had been released in another year and she got nominated, for example, Peggy Sue Got Married in 84 or Body Heat in 88, could she have won, or was she always destined to be Oscarless?
I mean, considering that she only got this one Oscar nomination, I don't think that she was close to in this year, or that she had really a chance, and probably just not on the Academy's radar like other actresses at the time. And was the question if Peggy Sue Got Married came out in a different year?
Yeah, in 84.
Okay. I don't see her win. I just don't think so.
Yeah, this is something Mitchell and I talked about on the 86 episode with her actual nomination for Peggy Sue. I think she just has such a bracing kind of like in-your-face style that doesn't always work for people, and I don't know if changing the year of release would have made that much of a difference. Joey Gentili said, recast these 80s Oscar talents and Karen Black in the roles above. Brenda Fricker, Mary Steenburgen, Meryl Streep, Maureen Stapleton, and Karen Black.
And Karen Black, of course. So I have, Brenda Fricker, Shirley Valentine seems just like a natural match.
Yeah, locked in, for sure.
I have Mary Steenburgen from Music Box. I can see her playing a lawyer. I have Meryl Streep in Camille Claudel. Seems like the kind of showy role that she would like to do. I have Maureen Stapleton in Driving Miss Daisy, and Karen Black in The Fabulous Baker Boys.
Yeah, that's a really good combination. Very similar to you. I have Maureen Stapleton in Driving Miss Daisy. I have Mary Steenburgen in The Fabulous Baker Boys. I think she would be fun and kind of sexy in that. Meryl Streep doing that French accent in Camille Claudel. Brenda Fricker very easily in Shirley Valentine, and Karen Black in Music Box, I think. I feel like I always cast Karen Black in the Jessica Lange role for these. For some reason, it's a 1-to-1 for me.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to some overall 80s questions with you, since we're at the end of the season here. Greg Creeman said the 80s were the first decade that Meryl Streep dominated Best Actress. Rank her 80s nominations from best to worst. And were there any performances of hers in that decade that she should have been nominated for but wasn't? Not really for me in terms of performances that she wasn't nominated for that she should have been. Here's my quick ranking. Number 1, Sophie's Choice. Number 2, Silkwood. Number 3, A Cry in the Dark. Number 4, Ironweed. Number 5, Out of Africa. And number 6, The French Lieutenant's Woman.
So I have, number 1, surprisingly, also Sophie's Choice. Number 2, I have A Cry in the Dark. Number 3, Silkwood. Number 4, Out of Africa. Number 4, The French Lieutenant's Woman. And number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the last one, Ironweed. So many. I forgot how to count. Yeah.
So same general sense of the top 3 and then the bottom 3.
Yeah.
Okay, Adam said rank the decades covered based on the quality of their collective winners. And then Eric Maxwell Brunn said, where would this decade of winners rank among the other decades via winners? So kind of a similar question. I don't really want to super rank them concretely necessarily. I feel like I like half of them and the other half not so much, or they're lukewarm. I think the 60s, 70s are my favorite overall. The 50s probably pretty high too. I think the 80s do have some high highs like Shirley MacLaine, Meryl, and Cher, but most of the others I don't particularly stan.
I think my favorite 2 decades are the 60s and the 80s actually. And I would then say 50s, 30s, 70s, and 40s in one group, but I would probably, if I would rank them, then I would probably maybe have the 40s last.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I would do as well. Well, on that note, Jim has an interesting question. Recast the winners of this decade, 80s, in the roles that won for Best Actress in the 40s.
I'm so glad I prepared for that.
I know, me too, because that's a lot of work.
Okay, yeah. Where do I have it? Oh, it's here. So, I mean, the obvious first answer is that you cast Marlee Matlin and Johnny Belinda. If I don't want to be too lazy here, I thought about which part could be rewritten for Marlee Matlin, and I landed on Suspicion.
Ooh.
I thought that if you rewrite this and make her character so that she suspects her husband wants to kill her and she cannot communicate in a traditional, also with words in traditional way with other people, might make her even more lonely in her suspicion. So could see maybe that they could rewrite this as a vehicle for her.
That's very smart. I also thought of the Song of Bernadette maybe as a possibility for her.
Yeah, that as well. So from the others, I think we already said the heiress, Jessica Tandy.
I did not do that necessarily, but okay. I said Geraldine Page would be fun in the heiress.
Okay, great. Johnny Belinda. Okay, now I only have Marlee Matlin. I think my alternative would be, so I switch her and Katharine Hepburn with Johnny Belinda and Suspicion. So either one of them will do Suspicion and the other one will do Johnny Belinda.
Okay.
The Farmer's Daughter, I have Sissy Spacek, so a lot of this is just that some actresses were left and I had to give them the parts.
Coal miner's daughter, farmer's daughter.
Yes, it's the same thing, yeah. To each his own, I have Sally Field. For Mildred Pierce, I have Shirley MacLaine. I think this could be fun. She could definitely do the slap. For Gaslight, I have Geraldine Page. I think she could do all her ticks.
That makes sense. Yep.
All her ticks. Oh wait, I have Cher twice here. I just noticed. Who did I forget?
Oh boy.
Yeah, I have Cher for both Mrs. Miniver and the Song of Bernadette.
Wow, she's just that good.
She's just, yeah, let's leave it at that. She's that good, yeah. And I have...
Maybe you left out Jodie Foster?
No, I have Jodie Foster for Kitty Foyle.
Oh, okay.
This was basically the last one.
Meryl Streep?
Oh god, yeah, I forgot Meryl Streep. Oh god, how
could you forget Meryl?
Oh, I have no idea how could I forget Meryl. Okay, then I give Meryl Mrs. Miniver because I want to see Cher in the Song of Bernadette.
Love it. Good mix there. Here's what I have. Geraldine Page in The Heiress, Marlee Matlin and Johnny Belinda, Jodie Foster in The Farmer's Daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Yeah.
could be fun, scrappy. Sally Field, I also have into Each His Own, so we line up there. I said Cher in Mildred Pierce.
Okay, yeah, we know that Cher can slap.
This is true.
Yeah.
That's sorry to typecast Cher there, but I don't think this would really work, but it's kind of like what I was left with at the end of this. Shirley MacLaine in Gaslight.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Sissy Spacek in The Song of Bernadette. I think she could play that wide-eyed innocence very well. Meryl Streep in Mrs. Miniver.
Yes.
So, yeah. Jessica Tandy, but like in the 40s in Suspicion. Like she's right there, so might as well just put her in. And then Katharine Hepburn and Kitty Foyle.
All of them would work. I would watch them.
Yeah. A few more questions here. Celluloid Siren asks, what's the top 5 Oscar-nominated performances of the 80s in this category?
So I'm going chronologically. I have Jessica Lange and Frances, and Meryl Streep and Sophie's Choice. From 82, I have Deborah Winger, Terms of Endearment, Geraldine Page, Trip to Bountiful, and Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons.
Wow. That's a fun mix. I like all of those. I did a straight up top 5, like 5-1. So I feel like this should be very obvious to listeners of my show from the 80s based on what I've said about these ladies. But my number 5 is Meryl Streep in Sophie's Choice. My number 4 is Mary Tyler Moore in Ordinary People. My number 3 is Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction. My number 2 is Whoopi Goldberg in The Color Purple. And my number 1, of course, is Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons.
All great picks. Love all of them.
Groundbreaking, I know.
Yeah.
Lila said, do you have a new favorite discovery after having watched all the 80s nominees? Who do you think is the most underrated actress of this period? So I assume you didn't necessarily discover anyone here because you've presumably seen all of them, right?
Yeah.
But who would you say is your most underrated from this period in this category?
So performances that were nominated and are no longer talked about.
Yeah.
Maybe Deborah Winger in terms of endearment. I feel that she's always overshadowed by Shirley MacLaine for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's like I'm watching this movie and I'm always like, don't you see what Deborah Winger is doing here?
Yeah, I know. Not really a lot of discoveries for me. I actually hadn't seen Frances before, and Jessica Lange's performance there is pretty incredible. I don't know how much people actually talk about that, but like that is incredible work. It was fun to finally watch Sally Kirkland in Anna after years of hearing about it. I also feel like I have this kind of renewed appreciation for Sigourney Weaver, Deborah Winger, Kathleen Turner. Most underrated actress of the period, just by nomination standards, would probably be Kathleen Turner. Kind of Sigourney Weaver too, even though she's certainly acclaimed. But I just found so many of Sigourney's performances and rewatching them or watching them for the first time to just be so unique and so riveting.
Yeah, Kathleen Turner and Sigourney Weaver are very good picks. Yeah, just so much great actressing going on here.
Right. Okay, final question here of the season. Existential Rock said, which 80s Best Actress nominated performance was most likely filmed on location inside a woman's soul?
Always a great question.
Loving that we're keeping up that Susan Hayward appreciation club here. What do you think?
I would say for me, the only possible answer is Shirley Valentine, simply because she talks into the camera. So I kind of feel that it's only her. She's alone in that kitchen. We are living inside her soul. We are filming inside her soul in that kitchen.
Yeah, of this, I agree. I think this is opening up to everything of the 80s, though. So,
okay, sorry, all of the 80s. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, God, inside a woman's soul.
Certainly of this group, certainly. Filmed inside a woman's kitchen. I mean, also, I feel like Isabelle Adjani, that's a kind of performance that feels like it's from her soul, just from this lineup. But anyway, Sally Kirkland and Anna, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think I
Jessica
would
Lange and
say
Francis.
Jessica Lange and Francis. Yeah, I think I would say Geraldine Page in Trip to Bountiful, simply because she opens herself up so much.
Yeah, yeah. I could see like the tagline for The Morning After with Jane Fonda being that, for better and for worse.
That would be nice. I think this tagline works for almost everything.
Yes, certainly. Driving Miss Daisy, filmed on location inside a woman's soul.
Yeah. Fatal Attraction.
Yes. Okay. It's time to wrap this up with 2 more questions for you, Fritz. First of all, who do we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race? Probably obvious, but what do you think?
Yeah, probably obvious. I would still say Michelle Pfeiffer is the obvious answer, simply because she did win all these awards. Her movie was After Driving Miss Daisy. Hers was the biggest movie at the Oscars. I would honestly be a bit more skeptical if there was a more traditional Oscar baity competitor, but I just feel that the other 3 had too much going against them. So I assume that Michelle Pfeiffer was the runner-up, but despite all her acclaim that year, I doubt that it was close.
Yeah, I think Michelle Pfeiffer is pretty easily a runner-up here. One of the easier calls of this decade. I just feel like this is another one of those lineups that is kind of like 2 contenders, 3 also-rans, very much like 79, like Sally Field and Bette Midler, like no one else is really coming close.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Even if the ultimate winner does easily win, I think, maybe a little bit of support for people who people like Spike Lee or others in the Academy maybe who didn't care for Driving Miss Daisy definitely found a nice home in Michelle Pfeiffer's performance as an alternative. So final question for you. Who from this lineup would you have voted for?
I'm actually still undecided. I hope that's an acceptable answer.
No.
Yeah.
Undecided voter.
Yes, undecided voter, yeah. I'm torn at the moment between Isabelle Adjani and Jessica Tandy.
Okay. Well, what are we going to do about it? Flip a coin?
I think at the moment, if you put a gun to my head, I might say Jessica Tandy. Not sure how I would feel ask me in 1 year, and I might say Isabelle Adjani.
Wow. Okay.
To be honest, out of this lineup, she's the one that stays with me the most.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know. I know we don't agree here, but yeah.
Yeah, for me, it is between Michelle Pfeiffer and Isabelle Adjani. Yeah. And I think I would ultimately pretty much do the same thing as you, which is to say Isabelle is my runner-up, and definitely would pick Michelle Pfeiffer as my winner of this group. I think she completely elevates a stock character type and completely makes it her own. And it would just be nice to have Michelle Pfeiffer win an Oscar in general.
Yes.
Just for history's stake. And this feels definitely like the easiest opportunity to do so. Or maybe not easiest, but looking back for people who are not fans of Driving Miss Daisy, much easier to say, oh, Michelle Pfeiffer obviously should have won for that, which is kind of how I feel. So there you go.
Yeah, definitely agree that it would be a better world if Michelle Pfeiffer had an Oscar.
I think so. Yeah. Fritz, thank you so much for this really fun deep dive into a kind of strange lineup on the whole. Not one that everyone loves necessarily, but I always love breaking down any Best Actress lineup with you because you are a true expert, and I often defer to you for some races that I need more guidance on. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much again for having me. It's always a very high honor to be on your podcast. Always love listening to it, love being on it.
Yes, thank you truly so much. Where can people find more of you and your great Best Actress work?
You can find me on YouTube, Fritz and the Oscars. You can find me on Twitter, Fritz and the Oscars, and on Blue Sky.
Yes, highly, highly, highly recommend. And thank you all so much for listening. You can find me at Kevin_Jacobson on pretty much all platforms. And the show's at Oscar Runner Up on Twitter, Instagram at And the Runner Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And that's that for the 80s. Very fun season with a lot of actresses I love, some winners I don't love, some winners I think are fantastic. But we are about to enter a very exciting decade, which is the 90s. So I will announce here that the season premiere of the 90s will be January 31st, where we will break down the nominees of 1990, which were Kathy Bates in Misery, Angelica Houston in The Grifters, Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, Meryl Streep in Postcards from the Edge, and Joanne Woodward in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, with the winner being Kathy Bates. So with that, thanks again, Fritz.
Thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.